Oh boy, here we go again. Hi, I'm Anya, also known as Meppity, and I make edutainment videos about art and animation. Today I'm going to revisit an old topic that caused quite the controversy several years ago. Some of you may know me from my rather polarizing 2019 video where I redesigned characters from Hazbin Hotel. In that video, I shared my thoughts on the designs from both aesthetic and practical angles, offering alternative designs based on my feedback. Thing is, I was freshly 18, in my first year at CalArts, and hadn't had my ego checked in quite a while. The redesigns were hasty, not researched enough, and my tone was admittedly pretty condescending. I didn't do myself justice. Since then, a lot's changed. Hazbin got picked up by Amazon, Season 1 dropped, and then Seasons 2, 3, and 4 have been greenlit. A whole pandemic came and sort of went. The US had Trump for president, then didn't, and now does again. My British accent has weakened. I finally graduated CalArts last month, and now I've worked with places like the BBC, Netflix, Lego, Air Canada, and Kroger. Kroger, yes, I've designed those weird bobble-headed guys that you see in grocery stores in the US. There's some odd gigs out there. So, does all this time and growth mean I've changed my mind? Nope. I still stand by the original 2019 video and the follow-up I made a few months later. I just wish that I had done a few things differently. So that's what I'm doing today! Why am I talking about Hazbin Hotel again? Is this necessary? Am I clout chasing? No, but also not no. I'm not a drama YouTuber. Ugh. Or a commentary channel. I'm an educational creator. My videos are meant to teach, and one of the best ways to teach is through case studies. Hazbin is perfect for this, not just because it's now widely known, but because it's divisive in a way that makes people curious. I hope to bring fans, haters, and everyone in between into a cozy little sit-down to talk about design for animation. Yes, using Hazbin guarantees views, but I also genuinely believe it's the most compelling option. Most shows I'd use for a case study are either too safe to dissect or just don't excite me enough to talk about for hours. Because yes, this video is gonna be hours long. As I've said, I'm a working professional in the animation industry now. If you want receipts, head to the description or check out Meppity.com. I've got my resume and my portfolio there. So yeah, I know what I'm doing. And I mention this because this sets my video apart, not just from my past work, but from a lot of the Hazbin redesign videos that are already out there. I'm not just a casual viewer on a soapbox, I'm a professional character designer on a soapbox. Part of being a professional is learning to take critique, give critique, and not be too precious about your work. If you're a teenager and a huge Hazbin fan watching this, please keep that in mind. Feedback isn't a personal attack. You don't have to defend your favorite show unless it's through respectful discussion. While I do severely dislike the show, I also deeply value hearing why others love it. That love is valid, and this show clearly means a lot to so many people. I don't want to take that away. This video is for everyone, whether you draw every day or not at all. I hope you come away with something you can carry into future design discussions. If you haven't watched my original video or the follow-up, I suggest you do. It'll give a lot of context, and it'll also be an interesting time capsule of how I've changed. Both videos are linked in the description, but if you don't feel like sitting through dated content, no worries. I'm gonna give you a lowdown right now. 'Twas the tail end of 2019. My first semester at CalArts had just ended and my YouTube feed was blowing up with Hazbin Hotel thumbnails. Red backgrounds, pointy teeth everywhere. I had no idea what it was or what it was about. It looked not like my thing, and I was irritated by how hard the algorithm was pushing it. But eventually, I caved. I'm not a review channel, so I'll keep this brief. The pilot had potential, but the writing felt childishly crass. The visuals were frustrating, but even if this was the kind of thing I enjoy, something still wasn't working for me. And as someone deeply passionate about animation, who'd poured everything into going to her dream school, it was frustrating to see something deeply mediocre be the face of indie animation. Perhaps that sounds elitist, but I saw the quality of the work my peers were doing and couldn't help but think, why can't that be the standard? Still, I didn't want to just complain, I wanted to contribute something constructive, so I thought, why not redesign the main cast and share some insights in an educational way? So I made a video. At first I didn't think much of it, but suddenly the views climbed and the comments... Well, I had no idea how invested the Hazbin fandom was, how much they cared, how personally they took criticism. The video took off, and I started getting hundreds of wild comments. And when I mean wild, bro, I mean crazy death threats, vivid descriptions of how my family should perish. I had no instinct for self-preservation at the time, so I was constantly looking through the filtered comments out of morbid curiosity. It was a bloodbath. But then I noticed something weird. A lot of the worst comments were from self-identified 12-year-olds responding to a joke I made about Mary Sue's. Like, they literally opened with, "I'm 12 and I draw better than that." At first I thought, why are you watching an adult animation? And second, aren't you too young to even have a YouTube account? That realization changed everything. These weren't angry adults, they were kids, literal tiny children who clearly weren't properly supervised by their parents, going online and using anonymity as a weapon. To them, I wasn't a real person, I was a digital villain attacking the thing they loved most. And weirdly, that changed me. It made me more patient, kinder. I started assuming the best in people rather than the worst, and my perspective shift rewarded me. Over the years, I've had people come back and apologize. Like, DM me, leave fresh comments, reflect. Like, owning up to how they've behaved. It was really heartwarming. But before the apologies filtered in, I was still dealing with people thinking I made the video in bad faith, or thinking I didn't know what I was talking about. I wanted to roll my eyes into the back rooms. So I made a second video. After a few months of fallout, I decided another video would be a great opportunity to do my redesigns justice, clarify some of my initial points, offer a more nuanced take on character design, and apologize for my tone. Also do a less clickbaity thumbnail, but if you've seen the thumbnail for this, I guess I haven't learnt my lesson too much. Anyway, I was still cheeky, sure, but it was frustrating talking to adults who had no intention of actually listening to me, and then others clearly were too young to engage with my points. You can't please everyone, no matter how hard you try, and boy did I try, but overall, the second video had a much warmer reception. The critiques still came, but they weren't as vicious. Still, some people clung to things like, "But hell is red," or "They all wear bow ties because they're from the past," as if those were cohesive arguments, and I just didn't think that a third video would be worth it. But that was over 5 years ago and things have changed. To prepare for this video, I rewatched both my original uploads, and to my surprise, it made me emotional. I remembered them being snarky and mean-spirited, probably because the reception warped my memory over time, but upon rewatching them, I was so tame. Sassy, sure, but not cruel, not even particularly rude. Maybe it wasn't my tone that set people off, well, maybe a little bit, but maybe it was just that I was the guinea pig. See, I was possibly one of the first people to ever make a Hazbin redesign video. Maybe even the reason that the whole genre video became a thing, but I'm not trying to inflate my ego too much. I doubt anyone saw my post and thought, yeah, I want to be on the chopping block too. But I was definitely an early test subject, and people weren't ready for that. To wrap this up, I still stand by everything I said back then, but now, with the full series released, 5 years of experience under my belt, and a very different YouTube landscape, I think it's time for one last revisit. In the original redesigns, I stayed close to the Hazbin style. The second time, I let go of that and did my own thing, more loosely based on the pilot designs, but this time, I'm returning to that official look, treating the designs as if they are in-progress concepts on a show I've been hired onto. I want this to feel like a production-level piece, something that could realistically happen in a studio pipeline. Also, because, those first redesigns sucked booty hole. I did the worst job at imitating that style. Alright, we're already deep into this video. Let's talk character design. What makes a good character design? Before we talk about Hazbin Hotel, let's get onto the same page about what makes a character design good. And yeah, what does good even mean here? Good depends on context. A character designed to be a toy needs to function in 3D. A brand mascot has to match a company's vibe and sell their product. Some OCs exist just for their creator and don't serve any purpose beyond self-expression. But since we're talking about Hazbin, I'm focused on what makes a design work for animated television. Profitable equals good. For a show to succeed, people need to watch it, and ideally become obsessed, buy merch, post about it, cosplay. Even the most passionate indie production ultimately has to make money. So if your designs help you do that, congrats, you've succeeded. Wait, so does that mean the Hazbin Hotel designs are actually good? Well, yes and no. Hazbin made money. A lot of it. It started as a scrappy indie pilot and became one of the most popular online animations ever. Now it's a full-blown streaming series with 4 seasons greenlit. That's huge, and honestly, mad respect. But here's the thing, why stop there? At the risk of sounding snide, one of the reasons people adore the designs is because they're sexy. The Tumblr sexy man energy is strong in the Helliverse. It's raunchy, stylized, and oozes fanfic potential. Demons are already drool-worthy material to a lot of people, and the show knows this. It leans into shippability and makes itself enticing to the Rule 34 crowd. But of course, that's not the only appeal. Vivziepop's style taps into very specific subcultures. Hot Topic teens, scene kids, electro swing revivalists, emos. For anyone from the, as I would call it, like raw XD generation, or the younger folks emulating it, Hazbin feels like home. That's actually cool. Shows like The Simpsons or BoJack Horseman never really catered to that crowd. Hazbin does, and that matters. That said, aesthetic and sexual appeal shouldn't be an excuse for a lack of strong design fundamentals. A lot of the fanbase is uncomfortably young or not artistically trained, so they're more likely to focus on what feels cool, what scratches an itch, and that's fair, but the people designing the show should have a trained eye, and I'll get into that later. See, despite all the pizzazz, many of these designs are missing core principles that would only help them without taking away their essence. I'm going to keep this as objective as possible. Whether you're designing for Arcane, Cocomelon, Bluey, Scooby-Doo Mystery Incorporated, Charlie and Lola, Gravity Falls, there are shared foundations that make a character design truly sing. Communicating a story. The most important job of a character design is to serve the story. If a design doesn't help tell the narrative or reveal something about the world or character, then no matter how pretty it is, you're just polishing a poop. Clarity and readability. Designs should clearly and immediately show who the character is and how they're feeling. If I can't tell where the face is or what emotion is being expressed, that's a problem. Good designs account for how a range of emotions will be expressed. Animatability. Great designs aren't just nice to look at, they're built to move. Overcomplicated details or stiff proportions can make animation harder, slower, or even impossible. Time, budget, and animator sanity are all part of the design puzzle. If your design makes animators want to explode, maybe rethink it. Recognizability and iconic design. A good design should be consistently recognizable across episodes, poses, and even time skips. A great design is iconic. If a 5-year-old draws it from memory and you can still tell who it is, you've nailed it. Think Minions or Ariel. That's the bar. If you're designing your own characters, I dare you to draw them with your non-dominant hand, or maybe even your foot. If you still recognize them, that's a solid design. For example, here's my character Nettle from my series Stuck in the Globosphere, drawn with my literal foot. I don't need the art skills to demonstrate who this character is. Posing and silhouette. Posing is how a character holds themselves. Their posture and body language, it is key to showing personality. A slouch, a strut, a stiff stance, it all says something. That said, posing shouldn't be used as a crutch. If your character only looks good mid-action, that's a red flag. The iconic Jorge Gutierrez, creator of the Book of Life and El Tigre, once told my class to design characters standing neutrally. If they still look interesting just standing there, you're on the right track. Posing should support your design, not save it. On top of that, a strong silhouette makes characters readable in an instant, even in shadow or from afar. It's your design stripped to its bare essentials. If the shape alone doesn't say who they are, then you may be over-relying on internal details. Exaggeration. Animation thrives on exaggeration. That's why it's one of the 12 principles. Whether it's proportions, movement, or color, animation lets you really push reality into something more expressive. That doesn't mean randomness, it means stylized intention. If done well, exaggeration makes designs more memorable, emotional, and fun to watch. Appeal. Appeal doesn't mean pretty, it means visually engaging. Appealing designs invite you to look at them for hours of animation. They can be cute, grotesque, weird, elegant, whatever suits the character. Appeal is subjective, but it is always worth striving for. Uniqueness. This ties into a lot of the earlier points, but it's worth saying directly. Unique designs stand out. If your character blends in with everything else out there, audiences will forget them. Push your ideas to places only you could go, and be sure your designs stand out from each other too to reinforce memorability. Consistency and cohesion. Characters do not exist in a vacuum. The designs need to feel cohesive with their environment and each other. Here's what to look out for that. Scale. Do they feel like they belong in the same physical space? Can they use the same furniture or walk through the same doors? Detail level. Are some characters super detailed while others look chibified? Keep that balanced. Line work. Is the brush style consistent across designs? If not, does the difference feel intentional? Color palette. Do the colors feel lit by the same light source? Is there a shared logic, like capping saturation or sticking to a particular hue range? Visual language. Do they follow the same stylistic rules? Things like line tapering, shading, and proportions should match or break the rules together with purpose. And yes, of course, you can bend or break rules if it's intentional and supported elsewhere. Like in my short for Stuck in the Globosphere, I'm mixing 2D cartoon characters with photorealistic backgrounds. It works because the contrast is bold and deliberate, and things like lighting, color, and compositing tie it all together despite the backgrounds and the characters being vastly different styles. Overall character design issues. Now that we're hopefully on the same page about what makes a good character design, it's time to dissect the has-been designs and see if they're up to scratch. Spoilers, they're mostly not. The word cloud experiment. To kick things off, I've done a little experiment. Instead of just telling you what I think the common traits are across has-been characters, I decided to let the fandom wiki speak for itself. I grabbed the appearance section for every listed character, ran that text through a word frequency calculator, filtered out the filler words, and generated a word cloud from the top 75 descriptors. Here is what came out of it. For transparency, I only included relevant adjectives and nouns, removing basics like eyes and hair. I stuck to demon forms only, unless a character starts out as an angel in the show. There are no alternate forms, full demons, or pilot versions. And if similar words showed up, like pink and pinkish, I combined them to keep things clean. Popular colors. No surprises here. Has-been's most popular colors from the top down are black, white, red, pink, gold, grey, and yellow. But also, red is additionally present with the inclusion of burgundy, magenta, coral, maroon, and cerise. These are all essentially variations of red. Side note, whoever wrote these wiki descriptions has a real thing for cerise. Like, that's a pretty niche color. I went to art school for 6 years and can count on one hand the number of times I encountered that word. But to their credit, cerise really does feel iconic to the has-been branding. I see it and immediately think of the show. Common features. Beyond color, the word cloud also revealed a handful of features that show up across multiple characters. We have horns, gloves, often of the fingerless variety, halos, masks, fur, feathers, and, of course, bow ties, which I'll rant about shortly. The gloves genuinely surprised me. I guess I wasn't paying enough attention. The rest checks out for a show about demons and angels, horns, halos, fur, whatever. They all fit the theme. But again, the bow ties, hang tight. I've got thoughts. Common patterns. In terms of visual motifs, the word cloud highlights stripes, dots, hearts, and X's. Almost every main or supporting character has at least one of these. Some have two or even more. These patterns have been all over Vivzy Pop's work since our high school OC days, and they've carried over into Hazbin. That's not the worst thing in the world. A strong visual language can include recurring motifs as long as they're not visually overwhelming or out of place. For example, in my show, I'm a huge fan of scalloped shapes and these chunky, organic, squarish wave things. You'll see them all over my designs. But as long as it feels logical within the world, it's fine, go for it. Length. The word cloud also confirms a preference for elongated shapes, with frequent words like long, tall, thin, and slim. Hazbin definitely leans into wiry, angular builds, the classic twinkish look, if you will. In contrast, only a few words like short, wide, and small show up, barely a blip compared to all the stretched out bodies. And sharp shapes. Let's talk about shape language. Words like sharp, pointed, and spikes pop up a lot, which totally fits the universe. Nearly every character has some combination of spiky hair, claw-like fingers, or saw blade teeth. Sharpness is very on brand. So, yeah, this word cloud exercise confirmed much of what I suspected. There's a consistent, if narrow, aesthetic across most Hazbin designs. But now that we've got the official descriptors covered, I want to dive into some of the recurring design decisions that, frankly, I think hold the show back. A lot of these were touched on in my original video, and I'm sure in others too, but we're revisiting them for educational purposes and to give you a clearer perspective on the design choices I'll be making in my redesigns. Hello! Editing Annie here with slightly messy hair and a slightly broken phone camera because I have a thought. Come with me. So, as you can see, I am deep into editing this video. This is almost 3 hours of content, and I've been working on this video for almost 2 months at this point, meaning that I've been in the Helliverse for almost 2 months at this point. And what that is I have seen season 1 of Hazbin over 3 times. I've looked at countless clips. I have been on Reddit, on the wiki, generally in fandom spaces, looking at additional YouTube videos. It's been an adventure. I've gone deep. And this has resulted in something rather strange. See, I no longer dislike the show. Crazy, right? Okay, so I still think that the character designs are a total mess. I still think that the writing leaves much to be desired, but ultimately what's happened is I have conditioned myself. I have acclimatized to the look of the show, the humor, the writing, to the point that I am able to look past the show's flaws and just focus on what I enjoy. And I think that's a rather wonderful quality that all humans deserve to have. Otherwise, the world would be a pretty miserable place. Anyway, why am I bringing this up? 2 reasons. I'm bringing this up right now, by the way, before I get into my critique, because, point 1, I really want to prove that I am not a hater. I never was, and I know that might be hard to believe. I don't know how else I can prove that, but never was a hater. I want this to be a genuine, faithful discussion and an engagement into something that is deeply meaningful to me, which is character design. I think Hazbin is a great vessel through which that happens. That discussion can happen. Anyway, the other thing is that if I, a staunch critic of the show, am capable of looking past its flaws, then I'm sure that the Hazbin fans, which might be you perhaps, are doing the same thing, whether you realize it or not. See, you're not just looking past flaws, you are developing a blindness, and that is not a judgmental thing, because that's what's happening to me. Like, many of the points I make in this video, I no longer really, am caring about, which is crazy. Anyway, but what this might result in is a few things. It might mean that when you do hear criticism of the show, you immediately take it as an attack or as something mean-spirited, which it might not be. The other thing is that typically if you're a fan, whether it was someone who just joined the fandom last month or if you've been a fan since before the pilot even dropped, you are engaging in additional content. And it's unusual. Hazbin is not the norm in that so much of the lore and the story and the entertainment of the show is from external sources. And so you forget what is from the show proper and what is extra, what's like extracurricular, you could say. And that means that you are not engaging with the show the same way that a casual viewer might. And it might also even extend into you inventing things. And again, that's not a judgmental thing. I've been doing that. I've had has-been dreams lately where, you know, like I kind of make things up, an idealized version of what I want this story to be. And so it's kind of like a form of clouding judgment. And the reason I say this is because I am asking if it is possible for us all to take a step back and try and view my critiques as neutrally as possible, to not be, to not judge this from the perspective of someone who will defend every single thing about this show, to find an excuse for every single element, but for someone who can love this show but also accept the places in which it does not work. I think that that is a form of patriotism, you could say, and I think it is a due diligence we all deserve to have for two reasons. One, I think that if you're voting, right, like if you're in an election, I think we should all vote, and I think we should all also look at what's on the ballot and what the policies are that we're voting for. We should be informed. And the reason we should be doing that is two. We want the best for ourselves, right? We want the best world possible when we're voting politically. We want the best animation possible when we're voting with our views. And so if corporations see that we like the high quality stuff, then we are going to get more high quality stuff. Unfortunately, especially in this age of AI, things are deteriorating massively because people will watch anything. And so if we are able to have a sincere discussion about what is and what is not good, then we will get more good eventually. Anyway, the last thing I want to say is, look at this t-shirt. This is available on Meppity.shop, and on the back, I can't show you, but it says, I normally draw better than this, and it is dedicated to all those times when you're drawing and then someone walks up behind you and cranes their neck over you, and suddenly now you have an audience, and therefore you have become bad at drawing, because when you draw and someone's watching, suddenly you're bad. I don't know if that happens to other people, but it happens to me. This comes in many colors, and it is available on Meppity.shop. Okay, thank you, love you, bye.
Everyone is red. Possibly one of the most infamous arguments against the design of Hazbin. It's no secret that Hazbin Hotel is drowning in every shade of red.
Too much fucking red! Fuck! Shut up!
This is a tricky one because part of what makes this show so visually distinct is the ever-present reds in the sky, in the environment, and of course, in the characters. It's not a bad idea to have a signature color. Take the portal green in Rick and Morty, or for a more similar example, the red of the Nether from Minecraft. It's funny, I actually had a hard time finding examples of heavily tinted environments in an animated series. I think this reinforces my point as to how this excessive use of one color is usually a bad idea, so rarely used. Basically, every show out there has a diverse color spectrum, with only carefully placed moments popping in to make a motif clear and a show recognizable. I think this really says something. I see this as proof that the excessive redness of Hazbin Hotel is a crutch, and a way of shaping an environment that reeks of insecurity. I'm genuinely not trying to be mean. Let's think about it. How can we show an audience that we are in hell without making everything red? The show already does some of these, but let's take a look at other design choices that could be used. How about dilapidation? Buildings held together by a hope and a prayer, improvised construction materials, broken and graffitied street amenities. We see some of this in the show already, but it's pretty minimal. How about lascivious motifs? Like brothels, graphic signage, phallic-shaped buildings, I don't know. This again already exists in the show, but I want to see it cranked up to 11. And then if we want to be more classically hell, how about burning? Fire, brimstone, more of that biblical connection to hell. You could even have lava, I don't know, smoke. All of this falls under environmental storytelling, the kind of passive design that conveys world building through non-speaking elements. Hazbin does some of this, but the constant red feels like a safety blanket. And don't forget, it's not just the environment that tells us we're in hell. The characters do plenty of heavy lifting. We're in the Pride Ring specifically, and these demons have horns, fangs, claws, glowing eyes, you name it. They look like Hellspawn with or without the red. Now, I know some people will argue, oh, but other circles of hell have different vibes. They're not all red. Sure. But across Hazbin Hotel, every location we've seen still ends up plastered with red. It's everywhere. Let me take a brief detour just to really reiterate how unnecessary the red is. Osmosis Jones. Osmosis Jones is a 2001 comedy set inside the human body, where a white blood cell called Ozzy fights off Thrax, a virus dubbed the Red Death. So already, 2 parameters are set. The environment is inside a body, so it should be fleshy, and the villain is supposed to be red. Simple, right? Yet the film manages to do so much more. Environments are much more dynamic than that. We always have a clear sense of where we are though. Even the characters break away from expectation. I mean, Ozzy is a white blood cell, but he's blue. And Thrax, the Red Death, he's more purple than red. The film trusts other elements, shape language, lighting, texture, movement, etc. to carry the mood and communicate the setting. Contrast and creativity matter far more than strict realism or over-reliance on a single color. I actually have a whole video planned where I'll go deeper into the environmental design of Hazbin, so if that sounds interesting, make sure you're subscribed! I don't think anyone's really covered that angle yet, and I'm really excited to get into it. I'm usually really not into backgrounds, but I think something about the discussion that is here really interests me. But back to Hazbin being red. Some of you are wondering why the plentiful red is a bad thing. Like, okay, we get it, there's a lot of red, but who cares? Does it actually matter? Well, let's break it down. It destroys visual clarity. The red isn't just on the characters, it's everywhere. Backgrounds are just as saturated and just as focused. That means there's very little contrast, and scenes become muddy and hard to read. Don't get me wrong, red is fine, a red sky, cool. Red accents in the wallpaper and signage, great. But if everything is red, then nothing stands out. Visual clarity is compromised. The other thing though is red is not the only problem color in this show. It is often paired with gold and off-white, both in settings like the hotel and in a majority of the main cast. Dark red versus light gold can end up being extra messy on the eyes, hence why the Hazbin Hotel itself is my least favorite location by a mile. You can say you have no trouble discerning what's happening, but honestly, you're probably squinting through the noise just like the rest of us. And come on, that much red is kind of boring. Every main demon has red in their palette. Every single one. That's unimaginative. With all the colors out there, why are we recycling the same hue? These characters have drastically different personalities, so why do they all gravitate towards the same color schemes? And it's not a world building rule either, because background characters are way more diverse in color. So what gives? The overuse of red makes it feel cheap. It's become so common it's lost all impact. Red is no longer dramatic, it's just wallpaper. Alright, this part's more subjective, but I still want to mention it anyway. You're welcome to disagree. Most modern depictions of hell are red. That's largely due to biblical imagery, fire and brimstone and all that. Artists like Hieronymus Bosch painted hell as a fiery pit, and modern media followed suit. Visually, Satan as we know him, the red skin, horns, pointy tail, etc., likely comes from early Christians demonizing other religions. They borrowed from gods like the Greek god Pan and Celtic Cernunnos, I think that's how you pronounce it, and turned these features into evil iconography. Even the red skin could trace back to the Egyptian god Seth, often bright red and associated with chaos. Point is, the red equals hell thing isn't original, it's recycled and has been doubling down on it feels stale. I know I've spent a huge portion of this section talking about backgrounds and not just characters, but I'll take the opportunity to say one thing. There are, of course, non-red environments in the show, and those are my favorite because they feel like a breath of fresh air. The clubs, Husk's bar, and Alastor's swamp to name a few, and also the neon scenes. They not only demonstrate that hell can be diverse, but also show how helpful contrast can be for character clarity. If by this point you're still thinking, I like the red, then hey, fair enough. We'll just have to agree to disagree. But for me, it's overdone and holds the show back. One of the other famous Vivsyisms is the whole everyone has the same silhouette thing. And yeah, it's pretty true, especially for the main cast. While background characters get a bit more variety, the leads, the ones sitting on the hotel couch, are basically all triangular torso, lollipop head, long skinny limbs. Now, yes, of course there's exceptions. Niffty's skirt gives her a different shape, Vaggie's hair helps a bit, and Pentious doesn't have legs. But that's about it. This lack of silhouette variety makes the cast look visually flat. These characters have different personalities, roles, and vibes, but they all take up space in the same way. Even a lot of the secondary characters fall into the same shape formula. And that's a missed opportunity in my eye. Strong silhouette diversity helps us instantly recognize characters and makes group shots more dynamic. Think of The Incredibles. You could quickly identify those characters just by their outlines. For a show that prides itself on being visually distinct, Hazbin's core cast ends up looking surprisingly samey. It's a loud show, built on quiet shapes. Everyone is skinny. As I've mentioned, most Hazbin characters are stick thin. It's not just unrealistic, it's boring. There's no believable reason the entire main cast would have the same bony frame. When I redesign the characters later, I'll dive into this more, but the main takeaway here is VivziePop clearly prioritizes aesthetic over logic. The most common defense is, but that's just Vivzie's style. And to that I say, style is not the same as design. Body shape is a design choice. Even in Viv's own past work, you see variety, just not in the main cast here. This is something I plan to explore in its own video because younger artists especially need to understand the style versus design distinction. Then there's the excuse,
why does there need to be body diversity? It's hell!
And honestly, that's such a lazy cop-out. Hell is the perfect place to go nuts with design, and if you can't think of a more interesting shape for your character, that's on you. Yes, there are the occasional broad shoulders or thick thighs, but almost no one besides Mimsy has a gut. The only characters with actual variety are background extras, likely because they weren't designed by teenage VivziePop. And that's the real shame. The potential is clearly there, but it's buried behind a sea of sameness. Detail overload! I'm sure you saw this coming. Hazbin is chronically overloaded with detail. The kind that's not just unnecessary, but genuinely headache-inducing. I'm not exaggerating. When my partner and I rewatched season 1, we literally had to take a break because he got eye strain. And we watched the Speed Racer movie with no issue. Excessive detail is often a hallmark of amateur design. Think Mary Sue's with 50 accessories and 3 eye colors. But more importantly, it shows a lack of respect for the purpose of animation design. Western animation runs at 24 frames per second, but is usually animated on 2s. This means that there is a brand new drawing every 2 frames, so it's like there's 12 drawings every second. Multiply that by a 20-minute episode, and you're looking at 14,400 drawings. Every dot, stripe, and heart stacks up fast, and that's why most cartoon characters only have 4 fingers. It's called line mileage, and it's one of the biggest considerations in character design. Some people argue, but anime characters are super detailed, why can't we do that? And yeah, I get it. But anime often runs on 4s, 8s, or even just still frames with only the mouth moving. They sacrifice movement for complexity. Western animation does the opposite. If Hazbin wants to keep its fluid, expressive animation, which is honestly one of its strengths, then the detail needs to be dialed back a bit. Because right now, the characters' details are often pointless and get totally lost against the even more cluttered backgrounds. The texture and patterning in the backgrounds actively clash with the characters, like there's no breathing room. It's visual chaos. I'll get into this more in the upcoming backgrounds video. Don't forget to subscribe if you're curious. But this right here is a prime example of chaos over clarity. Can you see what's going on immediately? Probably not. Editing Anya is back with another thought. So, I just talked about detail in design, and I feel that some people might be viewing me as a hypocrite at this stage. See, I'm going to talk about detail in more detail later in the video. If you want to skip to the part where I'm designing Husk, it's going to be over there. Anyway, but at this stage, I feel like I'm not making my point clear enough about the point of detail. See, I love detail. I'm actually super duper partial to it. I love including doodads and all my things, blah, blah, blah. But detail has to be done right. And there are 3 factors for me personally. One is the medium. So, as I talked about with animatability, 2D hand-drawn animation is very difficult to do because you're doing each frame one by one, but with a show like Maya and the 3 that was done in CG, you are making a model one time, or maybe a handful of times, and then you are animating that with math effectively. And so that doesn't require near as much animator sanity to make move. The other thing is that shows like this and other detailed shows that I enjoy, like I'll talk about Spider-Verse later, are masters of visual clarity, where the characters' expressions and poses really stand out and are very easy to read. The backgrounds never get in the way, neither do other characters, and that is something that I think Hazbin is weak at. If Hazbin was better at that, then the detail would be a little bit more palatable, a little more acceptable, but again, not at the expense of animator sanity, please. And then the final thing is specificity. If you are a fan of me and have watched other videos of mine, you know that I always bring up the specificity video I made a while back, because this is one of the most important aspects of design, in my opinion, and it is something that Hazbin also lacks. See, you can add as many details as you want, but if they don't say something, then what's the point? And I know that people are going to be in my comments claiming that this thing means that, this X means this heart means that, this spike means this, and whatever. But does it really? See, I feel like the very limited range of symbols included in this show means that what something means is a cop-out. It is you guys as fans searching for meaning rather than the designers finding uniquenesses to each character. And I know that this is a little subjective and you can hate me all you want for this opinion, but I think it's an important consideration to make. You know, why settle for something you've done 5 times already? But yeah, anyway, I'm not a hypocrite. Detail's great. Just, you have to do it right. Anyway, I'll see you later. Bye.
The bow tie bother. Bow ties are everywhere in Hazbin Hotel, and honestly, it's a design issue. Vivzy Pop has explained that bow ties help separate a character's head from their body, which makes them easier to animate. Totally valid. Smart design solutions that improve workflow are essential in animation. But why does it always have to be bow ties? There's so many other neck-related options. Chokers, neckerchiefs, scarves, ruffled collars, turtlenecks, regular old ties. Viv does occasionally use some non-bow tie options, but the bow tie remains oddly dominant. It doesn't feel like a functional necessity so much as a personal fixation, and one that's starting to flatten variety across the cast. In my redesigns, I'll still preserve that separation between head and body, just with different accessories that better suit each character. Also, if animating efficiently was such a core concern, then might I remind you of literally every other detail on everyone's outfits? Just saying. The fashion freeze. I've also seen people defend the bow tie overload by saying, "It's just the fashion of hell!" But that doesn't really hold up. See, if everyone in Hazbin had died as teens or early 20-somethings, maybe I'd buy that. Trendiness is often a youth thing, but most of the main cast died well into adulthood, and adults tend to freeze in the era of their prime. My dad, for example, was a teen in the late 1950s. He's old, I know, and still dresses like he's heading to a board meeting about the exciting new Teflon. Look to the TikTok trend where teens dress their mothers in Gen Z outfits. Suddenly, these grown women look 15 years younger. Why? Because fashion is a timestamp. So, if you, your parents, and your grandparents suddenly popped your clogs and woke up in the Pride Ring, would you all start rocking bow ties and neon scene wear? Probably not. On top of that, the show's own lore implies that a demon's form reflects who they were in life, so why are they all wildly different personalities but filtered through the same handful of aesthetic tropes? Because they're being filtered through Vivzy Pop's personal lens. Between the bow ties, pinstripes, scene hair, indie sleeves, top hats, and emo accessories, it all feels like it's been processed through the aesthetic memory of someone who came of age on DeviantArt in the 2000s. Which is fine once, but across the board, it's creatively limiting. Overall character design successes. There's actually a lot to the official designs that does work. For all my gripes, I sincerely think some of the design language Viv has built has areas of success and great potential. Simplification success! Something I'm happy to see with the official designs versus the pilot designs is that the level of detail has been vastly pared down without compromising the style and appeal. This is exactly what I was suggesting in my initial video and people were sending me death threats because of it. Lol. Anyway, whatever. I still think a majority of the designs need some reining in, but in terms of the, specifics, we'll get to that later.
For now, I genuinely appreciate the steps that have been taken to pair the designs to something more manageable. The characters feel alive. One thing that Vivzie Pop has always been good at is giving her characters energy. Seriously, every frame of this show feels so alive, and that deserves huge praise. In an era of talking heads animation, the dynamic posing is welcomed. Facial expressions are always clear and not afraid of getting extreme, but do tend to have range. I genuinely appreciate this commitment to flamboyance and big energy. The overall style stands out. Something that cannot be ignored is that the show does look unique. It truly stands out amongst its counterparts. Upon closer inspection, the style's flaws are apparent, but amongst everything out there, I can always recognize Hazbin. This is a really good thing, something that many current adult series fail to achieve. I think a large part of this recognizability is, unfortunately, the presence of red, but it is also certainly from the show's distinctly energetic shapes and lines. There's potential for zonification. Okay, this isn't exactly a traditional compliment, and it kind of goes against everything I've been saying, but hear me out. I swear this isn't backhanded. Hazbin character designs tend to follow a very specific formula. Certain colors, shapes, accessories, etc. From a professional character design standpoint, that can be limiting. But for a fan base, that kind of formula actually becomes a template. It gives fans a framework to create their own OCs and sonas that fit convincingly into the Helliverse. That's huge for engagement and community building. It reminds me a bit of the My Little Pony fandom, same body base, different hair, eyes, colors, and cutie marks, or Steven Universe, where the characters all stem from gem types and placements. It provides a creative foundation. Hazbin's formulaic nature, while a weakness in some ways, ends up being a feature when it comes to fan creativity. Whether it was intentional or not, it's kind of genius from a marketing standpoint. It inspires young artists, creates fan buy-in, and keeps fans busy during post-season hiatuses. Character analysis and redesigns. Now that we've got my overall thoughts out of the way, let's get to what you really came for, the redesigns, and a few newcomers too. Okay, here's how this is gonna go. With each character I redesign today, I will review the official design as well as my old redesigns where relevant. I will also compare the pilot design to the official design. Each character will also be paired with a particular design concept to make this maximally educational. That's right, I paid out the wazoo for CalArts, so you don't have to. Let's begin. We're starting off with Charlie. Pilot design and original feedback. I'll keep this brief. Charlie's pilot design had potential, but felt unbalanced and kind of purposeless. Nothing really stood out about her, which is wild considering she's supposed to be the princess of hell. Sure, you could argue she's blending in with her people, but from a design standpoint, she didn't have any features that felt uniquely hers. As for my redesigns, I didn't push very far with my first pass, mainly just balanced her hair and removed some clutter. I also accidentally made her really tall and bulky. My bad. My second pass is where I explored more, and I'm still fond of the waistcoat, bootcut trousers, shorter hair, neckerchief, and the vibrant yellow sclera. Also, balloon sleeves. I know I overuse them, especially in Stuck in the Globosphere, but I think they work here. That said, I'll definitely try out some new elements this time around. Maybe this will come as a surprise to you, but I actually really like Charlie's official design. Maybe it's because they listened to my feedback. I'm joking, but it is interesting how many minor similarities there are between my redesigns and what the official design became. The symmetrical hair, matching red suit, removed trouser buttons, and slightly thicker eyelashes all reflect the suggested changes I made in my first two redesigns. I also like the boosted vibrancy in her additional color palette. The pilot version was a little washed out, and of all the characters, I don't think the main one should be washed out. The strong yellow sclera and red pupils work well for her in my opinion, and not only is she visually interesting to me, it kinda puts Charlie closer to other Hellborn creatures in a sweet way. Now she shares a trait with imps and succubi without feeling like one. There are still a few small things I'd like to change though. The knees. The way her trousers flare outward at the knees just doesn't track. It interrupts the flow of the legs and isn't how fabric works, not even as a stylization. I know this is a nitpick, but it really bothers me. The shirt flap. This little white panel sticking out under her jacket drives me nuts. If it's a button-up, which it clearly is as confirmed in episode 4, when she takes a jacket off, then it should be tucked in. It doesn't even look like a shirt, if anything it looks like a t-shirt. I get that it's probably meant to break up all the red, but it adds unnecessary lines and doesn't serve a function. Let's just strip it. The bow tie. I wrestled with this one. Originally I thought it made sense for Charlie to wear a bow tie as a kind of uniform in hell, but after revisiting my redesign, I preferred the neckerchief tied in a bow. It's elegant, powerful, and nicely mirrors Vaggie's design. Matching bows? Adorable! Let Charlie keep the motif, but let's soften it. Aside from those 3 things, I've actually got no major complaints. Charlie's official design works well in motion and feels more balanced. I'm still going to have fun with my redesign, but ultimately she'll be getting off relatively unscathed. Refinement in the name of success. For our first character design topic, I wanted to celebrate. Something integral to professional character design is iteration and refinement, 2 things that ensure a design ends up as good as it can be. This official Charlie design is actually a testament to trying variations and experimenting to find the best version of her design. In the industry, design happens in stages. Sometimes those stages get skipped or squished depending on how important the character is, or, more realistically, depending on time and budget, especially in TV. But here's the general roadmap. Step 1. Research. This is your foundation. Before drawing a single line, a designer should ask, who is this character? What's their personality, backstory, and setting? What context might influence them visually? Every design choice should stem from this research. I'll go much deeper into this when we get to Alastor. Then comes the blue sky phase. This is the throw spaghetti at the wall stage. It's playful and loose, you go with your gut. The goal isn't polish, it's idea generation. These sketches might not even be shown to a supervisor, you're literally just looking for a spark. After that is the exploration passes. Once a few directions stand out, you start narrowing down. Your sketches are still varied, but now they follow certain constraints, like, say, keep it humanoid, or must wear a suit. This is also where you start factoring in animatability. Can the character move believably? Not realistically, but believably. If she scratches her head a lot, can her arm actually reach up there? Once you're done with exploring, now it's time for refinement. This is where things get ultra specific. You're tweaking stripe counts, belt thickness, shoelace styles, you name it. This stage can feel a little silly, but moving one thing by just a few pixels can honestly make or break a design sometimes. You're also checking your design against others, making sure it works in a lineup and doesn't add unnecessary visual clutter. And animatability becomes priority number 1. You're asking, is this something someone can draw 10,000 times in every pose? Color styling. Usually this is handled by a color stylist, not the character designer, but nowadays studios sometimes hand that job to the designer anyway. This stage involves a lot of trial and error, adjusting colors to make sure they work in context against backgrounds, other characters, lighting, etc. Even small palette tweaks here can make a massive difference. And finally, technical packaging. This is considered the boring part for many, unless you're me, in which case I say it's pretty fun. Once your design is locked, it's time to make technical packets, which are turnarounds, expression sheets, mouth charts, special poses, prop holds, etc. These guides exist so overseas animators, like Hazbin's team in Australia, can draw the character consistently. American shows are usually animated in places like South Korea or Australia, and you won't be able to check in every day, so the more specific your packet, the less likely things will be misinterpreted. In animation, time is money. If your design isn't clear, studios cannot afford constant retakes. It has to be animation-proof. In reality, these stages are fluid. Some happen out of order, repeat, or even overlap. Think of it like a choose-your-own-adventure story. Each stage offers options, and the choices you make shape the next steps. What happens when there's no time? Sometimes iteration just doesn't happen, either because there's no time or no budget. On a Netflix project, I once had to skip exploration entirely for some little comma creatures. I just tweaked what was in the boards and called it a day, and that was fine. They were one-off background characters in a 1-minute song. No one else had to animate them but me. But when it does matter, say when a character plays a bigger role, That's when iteration really shows its value. A senior designer might be able to speed through the process and still land a great result because they've trained their eye. They know instinctively what questions to ask and what pitfalls to avoid, effectively doing a lot of the iteration in their head and only drawing out what they trust most. Can you iterate too much? Absolutely. I do it all the time, unfortunately. Too many options can backfire, and indecision can lead to messy, unsatisfying designs. If you're trying to combine all your favorite elements into one thing, sometimes it just leads to a watered-down, uninteresting, blah decision. It's okay to explore, but if you find yourself with something you love, commit. There's really no such thing as a wrong choice, so don't let yourself spiral. For example, it took years to land on a final design for my character Nettle. I quite literally had 100 versions at one point, trying to mash everything I loved into one, which honestly just made me miserable. I only made a decision in the end because I had a homework deadline, so I picked something. That something became her base, and I haven't looked back since. Let iteration be your guide, not your tormentor. You don't need a million versions, you just need one that works.
Okay, now it's time for my redesigns. As you probably could tell from the time-lapse you've been seeing, I didn't just do one version of Charlie this time, I did a multitude. In fact, I did this for all of my character designs this time because I wanted to show you the professional production pipeline and what exploration really looks like. Anyway, for Charlie, I didn't stray too far from her official design because I quite like it. I didn't really mess with the body in any which way, I just kind of tweaked the hair, the costume, and the coloration. One of the main things I wanted to try out was princess seams. If you don't know, a princess seam is a garment construction type where the seams on the top go vertically along the apex of the bust. I think it looks really lovely and flattering, and I think it suits the, well, princess of hell. The other thing I wanted to try was a sleeveless option because so many characters have suit jackets, and so in this version I gave her a vest instead, and I think this helps her arms stand out as well. I also wanted to play with, of course, the neck area, and so I tried a version with a high neck, a version with a classic bow tie, just a little more round, and then something from my design, which is this necktie that is tied into a bow. I think this version would be really cute, especially if it matches with Vaggie. I also wanted this to be a pop of color that is contrasting against the rest of her. Speaking of colors, I did mostly do reddish options because as the Princess of Hell, she makes the most sense, I think, to fit in with this hellish color scheme. But I worry that the darker options wouldn't stand out very much against the backgrounds of the show. That is why I'm a big fan personally of the pink options, that steel gray option. I think this one looks really nice and cool. And then also the slate gray and navy option. The navy option may lean a little too close to heaven, but I think it's kind of cool and subversive, and I think it shows that there can be variety within this hellish environment, especially because it is paired with the red underjacket and the bow. I also played around with her hair and coloring in these two wildcard options. Don't love it, but I think it's always worth testing out and pushing limits to see why you don't like something, and, you know, that's fine. As for her hair, I gave her a bunch of options, but again, they mostly stayed within the realm of like the blobby tie thing she has, but my favorite personally is the teeny tiny bob. I would love to see a later version of her in the show where she hacks all her hair off and ends up with this cute short bob. What do you think? I'm pretty proud of these options. I'd love to do more someday, but for now, I personally think I could see these in the show proper. Moving on to Vaggie. Pilot design and original feedback. Looking back, Vaggie's pilot design is a bit of a time capsule. She was a completely different character back then, so different that it feels weird to critique the design based on the version we know now. I doubt we'll ever learn much more about the pilot Vaggie, but from what we do know, her design was fine. Not awful, but not particularly compelling either. It really just felt like another Vivzy Pop doodle rather than a fully realized character. It didn't make me ask questions, not even, why does she have X's on her tits? And that's telling. Viv has used the X motif so often that it felt more like a stylistic tick than a meaningful design choice. Some fans speculated the X's were tied to how Vaggie died, but I stand by my belief that they were just there.
The X on the eye was irritating to me too. It felt distracting with how it was animated, and it never seemed to have a consistent thickness or size. So then came the redesigns. Oh boy. My Vaggie redesigns caused a stir. A lot of people called her fat, which is goofy considering she still has such a snatched waist. Even if she was fat though, who cares? Realistically, I don't think obesity would have made sense for a trained fighter like Vaggie, but the visceral reaction to any deviation from Viv's twiggy proportions says more about the fandom than my design. That said, I'm not a fan of my first redesign. I felt creatively handcuffed by VivziePop's sensibilities, like I couldn't fully commit to any bold changes. I kept the clothing X's despite not liking them, and accidentally made her super stiff. At the time, the pilot didn't give me enough insight into her personality, so I just didn't feel confident veering too far off course. And it shows. I also removed the eye X and was met with raucous disapproval. My second redesign was thankfully a lot more fun. I was still cautious, but felt more free to experiment. At the time, public canon said that Vaggie was a sinner who died in 2014, so I leaned into fashion from that era. I loosened her clothes to make the silhouette more dynamic and flowy, and the big win? I reshaped her hair to resemble moth wings. This was my favorite decision in any of my Hazbin redesigns. She was, after all, supposed to be based on a moth, and I thought, why not make that actually apparent? As for the eye X, in my redesign, I at least moved her hair so the X could sit directly on her face. I think it looked decent, and people clearly still think the X is important, which, after the season came out, it was, so whether it's floating or physically on her face, I'll keep it in my next version too. Official design and feedback. I don't love Vaggie's official design, but I definitely prefer it to the pilot version. And hey, they kept my mothwing hair idea. Guess I wasn't the only fan of that one. All the other X's were removed except for the one on her eye, which tells me those pilot X's were, in fact, not as essential as people insisted. Feels a little vindicating after all the hate I got. Her new outfit is not bad. It's a little cluttered, there's stockings, fingerless gloves, weird scalloping that doesn't quite match the rest of her shape language, but overall the proportions and detail balance are solid. I just wish she could have escaped being redified. One mega nitpick I want to touch on is tangents. These are subtle compositional errors where lines awkwardly converge, or touch in uncomfortable ways, or get too close to each other or to the edge of the canvas. In Hazbin, they are everywhere. With Vaggie, look where her skirt meets her thighs, where her hair touches the top of her stockings, or how her fringe pinches near her arm. These aren't the end of the world and are common even among longtime professionals, but they do create subconscious visual discomfort. In my redesign, I'll do my best to dodge these. Here's my biggest issue, Vaggie's body shape. Now, spoilers, she's an angel, a former exorcist, a battle-trained warrior who wields weapons and climbs buildings like it's nothing. So, why does she look so delicate? I know people will argue that this is intentional subversion, that strength can come in petite packages, and sure, that can work. But in this case, I don't buy it. VivziePop's designs often prioritize what she finds attractive over what makes sense for the character. There's a lack of intent behind many choices, and that's what bothers me most. It's worth stressing that there's a difference between a stereotype and a character design that follows logic. Vaggie is a lesbian and the aggressive protector in her relationship with Charlie. Stereotypically, she might be androgynous or butch. When I gave her more curves, people accused me of making her a Latina stereotype, which is understandable. There is a delicate line when handling representation. But changing Vaggie isn't about fitting a trope. It's about giving her a body that tells her story. And that body says, this person has fought. Hazbin's humanoid characters have a bizarre uniformity in their forms. Where's Husk's beer belly? Why does almost everyone have perfect posture? Why does Vaggie have zero muscle definition despite scaling the hotel with ease? The fandom's aversion to body diversity is mystifying. Of course, you could argue,
It's hell! No, nothing follows Earth logic.
Or, she just has a sleeper build. Or,
Husk burns calories fast.
but to me, those are cop-outs. Character design is half character, half design. Every choice is an opportunity to inform the audience, so why ignore that? And if you think giving Vaggie some muscle somehow makes her less feminine, ouch. Femininity is not tied to being rail thin. Vaggie already expresses softness through her wardrobe. I mean, have you seen her cute little baby doll nightie? A muscle mommy Vaggie can still be gentle, elegant, and feminine. Long story short, I'm giving her muscle in my redesign, not to make a point, but because it just makes sense. Subversion and purpose. Subversion is a great tool in every stage of writing and design. It helps keep stereotypes at bay and keeps audiences on their toes. At its core, subversion is about challenging expectations. Sometimes it's used to hide the truth and set up narrative twists. Look at Bellwether from Zootopia, or just Shrek as a whole. Charlie, the Princess of Hell, subverts expectations by being extremely kind, uplifting, and optimistic. Her oh-so-scary father turns out to be a not-so-scary duck-obsessed dope. And Alastor, a ruthless killer and sinister dude, is well-mannered and affable. But subversion shouldn't stand on its own. It should always be paired with purpose. Ask yourself, what expectation am I breaking and why? Does it play into the story or theme? If not, and it's just done to be different, subversion can get confusing fast. Tonal dissonance can leave an audience feeling misled, and not in a good way. Not everything in world building has to have a reason, but in design, you have to make choices no matter what. So why not make them purposeful ones? Okay, wait, it just hit me. Sorry, this is totally unrelated, but those 12-year-olds who were flooding my comments in my original video are probably turning 18 now. Isn't that wild? That's the same age I was when I made that video back then. Okay, if you are one of those 12-year-olds that watched that video and are now an adult, please tell me your thoughts. I'd actually love to know if you still stand by how you felt back then, or if you're looking at all this through a different lens. Do you think I'm beating a dead horse? Like, has any of this brought something new for you to think about? This is so interesting to me. Yeah, man, time is weird. And now it's time for Vaggie's redesign. This is one of the designs I struggled with mostly because I think she was one of the most negatively received last time, but also because she was the first redesign I did this time, so I was still warming up and getting used to the Hazbin style. But ultimately I think I did an okay job, and I'm pretty happy with how it turned out. As you can see, I really leaned into the mothwing design for the hair, and also giving her more muscle, both in the arms, shoulders, and legs. For 3 of the designs, I kept her relatively short, as she is in the show, but then for this design, I wanted to try a taller option, going in for that muscle mommy look or whatever. I played around with costume a bunch for this, and I had a good time with it, but also I don't know if I landed on anything I personally really love. That being said, I think that the chunky belts and mini skirts in these 2 options are really fun, as well as the thigh highs, and I think it kind of leans into what exists in the official design, but is pushing it in a slightly different direction. I didn't want to make her too masculine in any way, so I really stuck with feminine shapes and options. I also kept the bow in 2 of these designs. Don't know how I feel about it. I'd honestly need to explore it more by drawing her from different angles, but I didn't have time for that. But I kind of focused more on the moth antennae on her hair. So as you can see, these guys have little frond things that stick out, and my intention with this was to imitate moth antennae. So I imagine that she could, in theory, move it and flick it upwards to make it look more like that. And then the other thing that maybe you guys will hate me for it, but some of these options do not have X's on her eye. Sorry. I wanted to try out a different thing, and I'll show you that in a second. But for this option, I hope you appreciate that I did a couple options where she has an X pattern in the fringe of her hair. I think it looks quite cool, and I think it's like a subtle nod to the intention of that X. Finally, color-wise, I did a few options that are sticking to her original palette, you know, with the red in there and the grays, but I wanted to lean into a more former angel heaven-esque palette with that gray, periwinkle, and yellow. But I also sprinkled in some purples, some blues, and even some pinks. I think these all look really nice. I have no favorite option, both like hair-wise, body-wise, costume-wise, color-wise. I really don't know which one of these is my favorite, but I'm happy with where these are going. I don't feel like I've landed on a final design, in theory, for any of these, but I would keep exploring, I would keep narrowing down. If you have a favorite, please let me know, because, man, Vaggie was tricky. I don't know. Yeah. I do want to show you one other thing, and this was done so I could illustrate my point about giving her muscle. So this is a redesign I made to show her only with changes that I would make to her current design that I think are necessary. And so, as you can see, I've given her more muscle, and I also played with the scalloping that she has on her official design. I think the scalloping being like one singular scallop cut in two is a little confusing and doesn't look like what it is. So I moved it around, put it on her skirt. So ultimately I took a few details away, but I think it still feels just as energetic. Color palette wise, not the worst in the world. I don't really care for it, but whatever. I don't know, I just hope that this drawing illustrates more of what my critiques of Vaggie's official design actually are. And then the final thing I want to show is, yes, I did in fact get rid of the X on this option, but that is because, what if the X was directly on her eye? What if her eye was still there as a shape, but it is completely pitch black and has an X over the top of that? And the reason I like this personally is that it is more hidden, it gets less in the way, and only in the most epic of wind flowing through your hair moments is that X revealed. I think it makes it more special and more interesting and intriguing to an audience base. The final thing I want to say is, yes, I did not design a version of her with her wings. I kind of wish I did, because I feel like the official design looks really bad, unfortunately, with those wings there. They feel very much like an afterthought that get lost in her hair, and I think that there's ways to solve that, but I just didn't have the energy to figure it out for myself, and so I wanted to stick with the version of Vaggie that we saw throughout most of season 1. So that's that. Tell me what you think. I like them. Don't love them. Oh, there goes my cat. Girl. My cat just stood on my laptop. Well, my roommate's cat, but I love her. She's, yeah, okay, alright. I'm taking a pit stop here to talk about money and how we as artists can make some. Despite AI breathing down our necks, there are still plenty of ways to earn an income from our art. For example, I do YouTube. I also offer art critiques on my website. But one of my favorite ways is through today's sponsor, Printful. I've been using Printful for over 3 years now, and I use it to put my art on things from stickers and prints to tote bags, t-shirts, and mugs. They offer a huge range of products, all of which are good quality. Here's me in a t-shirt that I designed a while back. I wear it all the time, and it's so comfy, and the print itself is still good as new. Anyway, the reason I love Printful so much is because I can create unlimited designs at no cost. I can then order samples and integrate product listings onto my website. They work with most major brands such as Shopify, Squarespace, and TikTok Shop. What's really cool is that you don't need to hold inventory for the vast majority of items. So if someone buys your stuff, it's made on demand and then shipped directly to the buyer, so you don't have to do anything. It's a really cool, low-stakes way of making some additional income. Also, even if you have no intention on selling stuff but want a custom product, say a beanie for yourself, you can just order a sample and bam, now you have your own reminder to save your files. I know this is a sponsor, but I genuinely love Printful and was super honored when they reached out. My website, meppity.shop, which you should check out by the way, has been using Printful since it first launched. Seriously, I'm really happy with the stuff I sell on there, like this beanie. Anyway, that's that for now. Back to Hazbin. And now, Angel Dust. Pilot design and original feedback. Of all the designs I reviewed in my initial video, Angel Dust was my favorite. His look was arguably the most unique and appealing of the entire cast, and he was a lot of fun to see in motion. That said, I was never a fan of how messy things would get when 4 or God forbid 6 of his arms were in action. It's a fun concept in theory with the arachnid motif, but disorienting in practice. I largely attribute the confusion to how thin the arms were, especially against those classic Hazbin backgrounds. The other thing that bugged me was the stripes on one boot and the random dots all over his head and face, dots that felt unnecessary. At the time, I didn't realize the under eye dots were meant to be his additional spider eyes, so I dismissed them, but with this new knowledge, they grew on me. I also don't get the difference between the different colored sclera. It just feels excessive. Not a deal breaker, but definitely an irritating quirk. I'm aware of the theory that characters with black eyes have them as a representation of a soul-binding contract they're stuck in. I think this is interesting. However, there is not currently enough proof for me to confirm that this is in fact the case, so my designs are treated as if this is not a truth. If that changes, if we do get proof, then of course, change the designs back. But for now, it feels like a bit of an ism in the designs, and it feels like a bit of a cluttered design choice that doesn't mean anything. So, take that as you will. Costume-wise, I didn't have too many issues. Angel died in the late 1940s as a New York Italian mobster, and the epically baggy zoot suit was in its prime. However, Angel was, according to my research, never really interested in the mobster lifestyle, so I doubt he'd carry those aesthetics into the afterlife. Also, being swamped in fabric doesn't quite suit the image of a porn star. Wild for me to say, but the bow tie doesn't even bother me much. He probably would have worn a standard tie to stay era accurate, but that would cover his chest fluff. I think a choker feels more unique, but honestly, I can handle a bow tie on Angel, whatever. As for body shape, I think Angel is the one character who really suits Vivzi's signature proportions. Though jumping spiders, which he's allegedly based on, are short, stubby, and teeny tiny, the long, gangly limbs work well for his personality and movement style. When it came to my redesigns, both of them stayed pretty close to the original Angel Dust, because if it ain't broke, don't fix it. My only major changes were the costumes, which I still stand by as fun options. I also played with his eye placement in the second design to make it match a jumping spider, and I had fun with color, trying on teal and orange with his pink and white base. People did not like the one-piece idea for the outfit, but I don't know, it's fine, I feel neutral about it. And that brings us to the official design. Guys, I actually like Angel Dust's official design! Hooray! I didn't mind the pilot one, but this version strengthens what I already liked and addresses some of my earlier gripes. That said, it's still not perfect, and it's got me tempted to try something a little different for this new redesign. Perhaps I will only change the parts that weren't working for me, but then, I'll probably do a wildcard design just for fun too. So what changed? Angel had one of the more subtle makeovers, but each tweak makes this version easier to follow and more animation friendly. Only one set of gloves are now pink. I really like this. It helps clarify Angel's acting and reinforces the top arms as the main actors. Yes, the pink still clashes a bit with Hazbin's red heavy backgrounds, but it fits his character. I think the better solution would really be to adjust the background palettes, not stripping pink and red out of every character, but that's a whole other thing. He has fewer spots. I'm glad to report that Angel's head has gone from 6+ spots in the pilot to just 2 spots and a heart on the back. It feels much cleaner without sacrificing personality, but honestly I think he'd still be fine with 0. Now his lapel matches his skirt. To me, this is a lateral move. Removing the pink helps the gloves stand out, but it also creates a dense area of contrast that might get lost against Hazbin's noisy backgrounds. While not a problem in most shows, it's an issue here because there's already so much going on. My partner and I both struggled to follow the motion in several scenes. It's a shame because it really undermines the animator's hard work. They removed the black pupil on his right eye. This is a small change, but it simplifies his eyes and creates more visual unity. Good job! The boot stripes were removed. Thank goodness, they were distracting and felt slapped on. The one new thing that I don't like is the pink strip of hair. What is that? What's it doing? It just looks odd and unnecessary. Nah. Also, I don't really know where to put this, so I'll just say it here. I find it weird that some characters have colored line art. Angel's is dark pink, Vaggie's is dark blue, and the rest are black. It annoys me a bit, maybe because of the inconsistency, but I don't mind how it looks in isolation. Maybe everyone should have had colored line art. Art in motion. The topic I'm covering for Angel's section is art in motion. This is a critically important aspect of character design for animation and something often overlooked by casual critics. What does it mean for a design to move well? I chose Angel Dust because I think he's actually relatively well designed for animation. Despite his 6 wiry limbs, the animators did a good job of making his actions readable. I especially loved the way his torso was used. Those back bends and elegant flow suit his sex symbol role perfectly. But even with Angel, readability is compromised because he doesn't stand out enough from the background. That brings us to what makes a design work in motion. Clarity is king! Animation is movement that tells a story. If the audience cannot follow the motion, they cannot follow the story. So, how do we ensure that a design is readable? Through contrast, of course! This is Hazbin's biggest visual weakness. Characters blend into backgrounds and into each other. If everyone has similar limb thickness, colors, and silhouettes, and the background is just as detailed and matchy-matchy, it's a nightmare for our brains to process, especially during fast motion or crowd scenes. The fix? Contrast. We need to make sure characters stand apart from each other and from their environments, and this can be achieved in a variety of ways. Side note for viewers who are just listening, now's a good time to watch to see my contrast examples on screen. Here we have value, so how light or dark something is. Proximity, how close or far away things are. Hue, so basically the color of something. Shape. Proportion. Movement. Texture. Direction, so like which way things are facing. Scale. Edge or focus, like how sharp is something. And finally, saturation, how brightly colored or how gray something is. The more types of contrast you layer together, the more control you have over the visual storytelling. Another way you can show clarity in motion is thickness and volume. Thicker line art or solid volumes make motion easier to follow. Watch me wave around a piece of spaghetti versus penne. Spaghetti is so flimsy, it sort of blurs into nothingness, but penne is solid enough for our brains to follow the movement from frame to frame. This is primarily because the gap from frame to frame within the penne is markedly smaller than that of the spaghetti. Hazbin's characters are wiry, like the spaghetti, yet they engage in lots of fast-paced action. This can be considered a mismatch. Thin lines work for slow, graceful movement, especially when they clump together and create like a faux thickness, but with high-speed animation, it's just too easy to lose track of what's happening. And then there's connectivity and flow. In animation, one of the 12 principles is follow-through and overlap. See, most motion does not happen in perfect sync. Typically, different parts of a thing that's moving move in sort of a chain reaction. Think of flapping your arm. The shoulder leads, then the elbow, wrist, and finally fingertips follow. The faster you move something, the more out of sync it gets. Now, if your character's limbs or tails are segmented by color, it becomes even harder to perceive them as one singular unit. It's not that you can't do multicolor limbs, but the flow needs to be considered. Maybe the color breaks could follow the length of the limb instead of bisecting it. Making sure the characters are easy to follow is only one aspect of designing for art in motion. It is also knowing how to pair movement with style. For example, South Park characters move in a very particular way because they were originally paper cutouts. This is a consideration that must be made anytime a new South Park character gets created. Shows like Clone High and Total Drama Island benefit from a more graphic style because they're rigged animation. They're more flowy than South Park, but still rely on snapping to key poses. In contrast, any CG show like Paw Patrol or something, I swear it's always the baby shows that are CG. Oh my god, there's Arcane too. Whatever. Paw Patrol. Anyway, they need a fully solid design that can function from all angles in an X, Y, and Z space. Long story short, how a character moves must be complementary to the design and vice versa. And the final consideration for art in motion. Story artists, character designers, and background artists are a team. I keep mentioning backgrounds as a detriment to Hazbin's character designs, and to some degree, that's unfair. A character designer shouldn't have to compensate for messy backgrounds, but does that mean the backgrounds are fully to blame? Not entirely. A key player here is the story artist. Their job is to plan how information is revealed to both the characters and the audience. Storyboards dictate the layout, blocking, and framing of every shot, which directly impacts how clearly a character reads on screen. They work with the designs to highlight the most important information, choosing shot types and poses that may differ depending on which character is being used. From there, layout and background artists build off the storyboards to prioritize the action, so when clarity breaks down, it's often a pipeline issue, not just a design flaw. Animators can help too, but they're not solely responsible either. Clarity is a team effort. If any link in the chain is off, it shows. Now it's Angel Dust's turn for his redesign. I didn't go quite as ham with him as I did with Charlie and Vaggie, but I still think we have some decent options here. This first design is me sticking to the original design as closely as I could and only making changes that I personally deem necessary. So I gave gloves to only one set of limbs, moved his eyes, and also removed the bow tie. That's pretty much it, and I'm really happy with how this one turned out. I played around with the colors a little, but I really do prefer the original version anyway. As for these other two designs, I pushed a little bit more and I tried to do a little bit more experimentation. So for this one, as you can see, I made the entire upper body fluffy. I think that this is a little more spider-esque and I think it looks really cute. Though I know that this gets rid of the whole fluffy breast chest type of thing that Angel leans into for his job, I still think that this can be utilized just as well, and I think this can still be effective for an adult film actor. The other thing I did here was I gave him mandibles of sorts. So jumping spiders are pretty famous for the big old mandibles that they have on their face, and so I wanted to incorporate that, but I really struggled. And so my solution was to kind of go for more of an earring vibe, so that's what I did here. I also adjusted the way that the eyes work so that in theory, they wrap around his entire head. This is once again more accurate to a jumping spider. And I think it would also be really cool because it means that he could have an eye on the back of his head, which that would be interesting. I also adjusted the way his legs work here so they kind of taper in at the bottom and are really, really long. And I think it's fun. I think that this works. I think that I could see this being utilized by him in his performances once again. And I also added a gradient to his hands. So as you can see, he's not really wearing any clothes other than panties, gloves, and boots. And so I wanted to make his fingers stand out from his gloved hands. And I think that this looks quite nice. And then this final version, I wanted to really lean into the arachnid vibe, and so I gave him a big old bug butt and gave him 4 legs. I imagined that a 4th and final set of limbs could come out when he's fighting, the retractable thing, and that would give him the full 8 limbs. I also shortened his jacket and his gloves, and I gave him a gun holster in one of these, but I didn't really design it, which goes against my own principles. It doesn't look great, whatever. I also leaned into the heart motif for this and the previous design, because if anyone is to have hearts in this world, it is going to be the most famed and successful adult film actor in all of hell. So yeah, I think hearts belong to Angel. Again, pink does work very well for him. I played around with various pinks and purples and I think they all look pretty good, but I'd love to know your thoughts. Which of these do you think works for you the most? Before we move on to the next character, I have a little secret to share. Since making my original video, I've become friends with a few people who were involved with Hazbin. At one point, I was even a +1 to a party at Vivzy Pop's house. LA is weird, I know. I don't think she recognized me or had any clue who I was in general, but I felt woefully guilty the entire time, knowing I'd publicly critiqued her work and was now benefiting from her hospitality. It wasn't anyone's fault, I just felt out of place in a space where everyone adored the Helliverse and owed their careers to it. It was kind of like being an atheist at a Christmas mass. I had stumbled into a world that wasn't made for me, and that's okay. No one had to cater to me or my tastes. All this to say, I really don't want this video to come across as a hit piece. This isn't drama. Viv and I, sure, we probably will never click as people or as artists, but I genuinely respect her and the impact she's had on literally millions of people. And now a newcomer. Niffty! I like Nifty's design. She, of all the main cast, stands out the most to me. Not only because she's smaller than everyone, but because she's a cyclops and her skinny limbs feel purposeful and thematic, what with the whole stabbing tendency. I also just really enjoy the way she's animated. Because she's more compact than everyone, she's easier to follow despite being one of the most energetic and frenetic of the cast. Her pilot design gave us a solid start, with her fun skirt and slightly more unique silhouette. I liked her overall hair shape, but not the scruffy details so much. I'm not going to separately review her pilot design more than that, but I'll note the changes made in the official design. Her torso and limbs were shortened, creating that more compact look I enjoy. Excess details such as the gold dots on her skirt, some hair tufts, and her necktie are gone. She feels much cleaner now. Occasionally, the poodle on her poodle skirt still made an appearance, but sometimes it's forgone. I wish they completely scrapped it, but oh well. I also like the addition of the scalloped waist apron. It's a functional detail that tells us more about her character and has reduced her overall redness. It's also a detail that actually adds cohesion to her design rather than unnecessary complexity, as it flows her white torso nicely into her skirt. My least favorite choice is those bright cerise splotches on her shirt. They're too uniform and on theme color-wise to really look like stains. They just look like clutter to me. I'd either get rid of them or convert it to two off-white blobs that look more like oil stains. But that's it! I really have no major issues with Niffty, and I'm happy enough with her official design. Yay! That honestly feels so good. Because I'm happy with her official design, I wanted to try something a little out there for my redesign. Almost all the main cast have a humanoid build with 2 arms and 2 legs. This is fine. I think it works for Niffty. But for such an energetic, animalistic, bug-hating critter, why not model her after a bug? Actually, I say that. Apparently, Viv was basing her off of the one-eyed, one-horned, flying purple people eater, which for some reason is one of my dad's favorite songs. So I'll keep that in mind too. Opportunity for pushing boundaries. Often, in design, the right path to something new and great is through trial and error. In particular, pushing designs past their limit in order to find the limit. From there, a happy medium can be established. A common mistake among young designers is settling for the first option or for not really trying anything out of their comfort zone. This limits the chances you have to strike gold. It's like going through the clearance rack at a thrift store. There's probably nothing for you there, most of it is ugly and gross, but sometimes you will find the next best thing and you got it for dirt cheap. Sometimes, pushing boundaries means trying something totally new, but when the sky is the limit, that can be overwhelming. Where do you even begin? And that's where research can be valuable. Whether you're working with an existing personality or creating a new one, it's good to ask yourself some questions. Some of these questions may be context dependent. In the case of Hazbin, you might ask, what animal is this character based on? Or in the case of Stuck in the Globosphere, the characters are hybrids of living organisms, so I could say, what pairing are they? Is it a grass and a sheep? Other questions include, but are absolutely not limited to, where are they from? Where did they grow up? How old are they, biologically and emotionally? What's their favorite color, or least favorite? Who would their favorite YouTuber be? What's their gender identity? Do they even have one? What are they afraid of? Would they rather be noticed or hide away? What climate do they exist in? Are they Kiki or Booba? Do they have a job? What is it? If their personality was a fabric, what kind would it be? What's their Myers-Briggs personality type? Do they have good posture? Is their clothing handmade, a hand-me-down, or the latest luxury? What can't they live without? What company do they keep? What would their favorite band be? What are their hobbies? Do they have any insecurities? I'm going to include a much more exhaustive list for free on my Patreon, so if you're in the process of creating a character of your own and need some prompts, head to patreon.com/Meppity to check it out. If you're not sure what to push, I suggest starting with proportion. A great exercise is splitting a character into small, medium, and big shapes. From there, try making the big pieces bigger and the small smaller. Sometimes in Procreate I play with the liquify tool for faster feedback. You could even do the opposite. What if the small areas became huge and the medium areas became tiny? You never know what you might discover. If you're looking to push a concept, inspiration can be anywhere. You could try the total opposite of what you already have, or maybe incorporate the shape language of an item on your desk. When exploring, you don't need to stick to your research. Sometimes it's fun to reverse engineer and describe purpose after the fact, as long as it doesn't feel shoehorned in.
Redesigning Niffty was a fun little adventure. My main change was taking it from a pinkish palette to an orange one. Orange isn't very present in Hazbin, so this makes him more unique. I also gave her cockroach elements. Starting with this design, I didn't want to stray too far from what we know Niffty to look like. I gave her stripes in her hair, which I've decided are actually a little unnecessary and excessive, and tried out antennae. Now, I also think that antennae aren't worth it, but they were supposed to match the shape language of these leg fronds. The leg fronds look like the stuff you have on cockroach legs, and I think it immediately reads as bug. I also changed up the stains on her apron to look more like dirt, and I gave her gloves. Now, I know a bunch of characters already have gloves, but for someone who cleans for a living, I think rubber gloves make sense. I especially like this blue design because it contrasts with the orange, but the yellow is a classic. For this set of designs, I leaned more into the bug. I turned her hair into a bug shell, and I turned her body into the underside of a cockroach. I also gave her extra limbs. Now she's a little more like Angel, but because one set has gloves and one set doesn't, her acting should still remain clear. I also gave her a headband. Headbands were worn by 1950s housewives, which she's based on, and this one has antennae as the tie-offs, and I think that this is much more purposeful looking than the previous antennae I did. Finally, for this version, I went all out with the bug theming. She no longer looks humanoid, and she certainly doesn't look like her original design, but I'm hoping that this still gives off kind of that same creepy feel. I kept the headband, I kept the gloves, but this time her hair is her body, and I've added these little spiral things to make them more like segments of a bug shell. I also gave her two options for the limbs. We have this stabby needle-like one that is kind of like what she already has, and then we have this hand version. Can you imagine how creepy she would look if she came skittering down a dark corridor with these hands? Unfortunately, this would be really complex to animate, so maybe not worth it, but I like it anyway. This design was a push to see how far we could take something and still retain what we know Niffty to be. Do you think I went too far? Do you prefer the classic? Or do you think that this works well? Let me know. Uh-oh, here comes the most controversial character. Alastor, Alastor, Alastor. In my original video, I expressed major distaste for his design, not just because he's another twinkish red emo in a suit, but because out of all the characters, his design makes the least amount of sense. Based on his backstory, how did we end up with this? Alastor likely died as an adult in the 1930s in Louisiana. His attire doesn't remotely reflect that era. He could have been dressed in anything from early 30s trends to what a young man might have worn in the 1910s or 20s. Instead, he's wearing what looks like fantasy Victorian-era costume with long coattails, totally divorced from the silhouettes of the time. His hair is the most egregious choice, though. Slick, well-kept hair was the only socially acceptable look for men until well into the 60s. A fluffy, side-swept emo mop makes no sense for someone described as refined and proper. And the excessive detailing, there's just so much going on that his deer motif gets completely lost. What's the point in teeny, barely legible antlers?
I remember people in my comment section not even realizing he had antlers. So, with all that frustration, I gave Alastor an almost complete overhaul. I kept his sinister smile and made him more imposing using 1930s color palettes and silhouettes. I also added era-specific touches to his radio staff and simplified the overall look for animation friendliness. The one thing I didn't change was his hairstyle. Even though I hated it, I figured fans were attached to it and I didn't want to instantly alienate them. But every single choice was despised anyway. Looking back, that version is stiff and clunky, but I still stand by the ideas. Well, except for the hair. I think people just severely disliked change and were upset I removed so much of what they enjoyed about his design. When you're only seeing one static image, it's easy to dismiss a design. I really believe he could have been just as appealing in motion with the same voice, mannerisms, and spooky glitching effects. But I hadn't won anyone over, so I tried again. My second pass was, in my opinion, a vast improvement. The version was less stiff, more expressive, and completely unshackled from the original. I had fun with it, even presenting multiple color palettes with different rationales. It received a much warmer reception. Sure, I still had critics calling it awful, but I also got fan art, especially of the sepia-toned version. I'm still happy with that design, but for my redesign, I want to try something new, incorporating additional context from Season 1. And now we're at the official design. Sorry, Alastor fans, but the official design is still my least favorite by far. I abhor it. Vivziepop stuck to the emo twinkle look almost exactly, making hardly any changes from the pilot. Every concern I had still applies, and it's honestly just sad. This creepy, mysterious radio demon has so much potential, and I feel like it's being squandered. To me, Alastor feels like a poorly researched, poorly justified, selfishly designed OC. Sorry, had to say it. Here are my specific issues with Alastor. As I said, his hair makes no sense for his era. His hair persists into the official design and still clashes completely with the time period. It wasn't even a style when he was alive and is far too messy for his personality. Let me be more specific. Men's grooming trends in the 1930s tended towards a side part and clean taper. By Alastor's death, products were still shiny and slick. Soft waves were favoured, sometimes turning into tousled tops, the style I gave Alastor in my redesign. This is about as messy as hair would get in this era. Side note, based on the Season 1 finale, his tufts are actually ears that he can move, so yeah, I'll factor that into my next redesign. His silhouette is completely wrong for someone of this era. Men in 1920s and 30s America wouldn't be adorned in a brightly coloured long suit. Alastor, being a traditionalist as suggested by his disdain for Vox, wouldn't be making up new looks or chasing trends, especially not ones that didn't even exist yet. What would Alastor wear? Well, after the Wall Street crash in 1929, most of America faced a casualization. After upkeep became more expensive, collars were no longer starched, no hat was no longer taboo, and so on. However, I imagine Alastor would have done everything in his power to maintain the look of star status and likely would have been more into late 1920s attire. Most suits of the late 1920s are very similar to what we see today, actually, relatively square and wider lapels. However, for Alastor, I think he'd better match the jazz suit. This was another type of suit that actually created an hourglass figure like he sort of has currently, just shorter and squarer. They often even included belts. This was a suit marketed to younger men. At this time, double-breasted coats were increasingly common, mix-and-match waistcoats were still pretty popular too, and maybe something Alastor would wear. Regarding his leg silhouette, Alastor's widen at the base, which is the complete opposite to what was popular at the time. A single pleated trouser with a crease down the front was the standard, and I think would look much more put together than what Alastor currently has. I also just don't get the colourful trim at the bottom. Like, why? What even is that? This is not a feature I've seen across any of my research as either a trim or hem throughout any of the 19th and earlier 20th century. I think it's just yet another Vivziism. The goddamn bow tie. Oh, Alastor is yet another victim of the has-been bow tie plague. That said, the single-end bow tie was popular in the 1930s, so in theory he could wear one. But should he? Not necessarily. Regular ties were equally popular, but sure, he could stick with the bow tie and not get in trouble with me. Monocles were already out of fashion by the 1930s. Monocles peaked in the late 1800s, but mostly among European aristocrats and army officers. By the mid-1920s, though, they were considered caricaturish and outdated. Alastor, a Louisiana radio star, doesn't fit the profile of a wealthy elite, a military leader, or a European dandy. The only real overlap might be with dandyism, which prized appearance, refinement, and eccentricity. But that movement was already firmly passé by the time Alastor was born, so while the monocle almost fits, it feels like more of a stretch than a smart choice. Visually, it clutters an already busy face and adds more confusion than clarity. I'd rather cut it all together. Why are his gloves like that? This might be a more subjective take, but I really dislike Alastor's gloves. They're black with red fingertips, but look more like another pair of fingerless gloves. Gloves make sense for someone of his era to wear, but this tipped look would have been highly uncommon and just feels like visual noise. Seriously, can you tell immediately exactly what is going on here? Boom! Plus, if the choice was to make it look like he has claws, why not just give him claws? He's a demon after all. Claws would be intimidating. Hiding them seems pointless. Seriously though, this is such a mess. It took me way too long to understand what I was looking at. And I'm not stupid. I bet people are going to take me every time I say, I can't tell what's going on, and respond with, well, I can, or just being like, well, you must just have eye problems or something. I'm like, no. I'm just being honest on behalf of the rest of us. But whatever. Whatever. Actually, for real, whatever. Anyway. And finally, for someone so prim and proper, he looks ratty as I was going to say hell, but then I realized that would go against my own point. He looks so ratty, and it makes no sense for his personality. Surely, a being as powerful as Alastor could easily maintain his appearance, even in hell. So why is his hair a mess? Why are his coattails tattered? Someone this fastidious simply wouldn't allow it. And we have proof of this in the show. He does care what he looks like because he goes to a tailor the moment his coat gets torn by Sir Pentious.
Well, it looks as though I need a visit to the tailor. Best of luck, chums!
Which, can I say, that was such cognitive whiplash. Throughout the whole scene, I was sitting there like, but what about the rest of the suit? Anyway, his perma-smile and Viv's primary inspiration of "you're never fully dressed without a smile" highlights that appearances matter to him. There's no reason for him to look this sloppy. My chosen design topic for Alastor is authenticity, sacrifice, and why research matters. The major pitfall Alastor falls into is that he feels totally anachronistic and not in an intentional or stylized way. So much could have changed if who he is had been properly researched. Something you might find interesting is I actually wrote the script for this video before I came up with any character redesigns. In fact, as of recording this, I still haven't drawn anybody. This is fundamental to my design process. Even though I understood the importance of research back when I was 18, I now have a much more cohesive grasp of how to conduct it and how to use it. There's no point in starting a redesign until I have a solid idea of what I'm working with, and writing this script was how I gathered the research I needed to move forward. In terms of what that research should look like, there is no one formula. For me, I wrote a script, but usually I'll do things like Pinterest boards and saving a bunch of different articles online. Sometimes I'll go to a library, or if I'm looking at animals, I'll go to a zoo. I also enjoy having discussions with friends or just scrolling through Instagram. One thing I think is interesting in research is kind of like discovering stuff within yourself. So sometimes it'll be about drawing techniques and testing out different brushes or looking up different color palettes. There are so many things you can research and so many ways to do it. There's also things like planners and Miro boards or creating a Discord server. Research can happen in any way. As long as it happens, that is what matters. Now, because I'm working with characters that already exist and are relatively fleshed out, things are a little different. I'm only making design changes that I think a theoretical boss would approve of. So I haven't started from scratch, I'm working with choices I'd at times consider less than ideal. And that brings me to sacrifice, an all too familiar word in the world of animation. That's part of being a professional. Sometimes we have to work with what we've got and prioritize client approval over our own satisfaction. Something important to acknowledge, and perhaps something you've already been yelling through the screen at me, is, none of this is real! Who cares if it's accurate to real life? It's a cartoon, it can do whatever it wants. And yes, you're absolutely right. There is no rule stating that all character designs must be truthful and accurate, but authenticity is important and exciting. Grounded designs feel more believable and compelling, especially to outsiders looking in. I'm far more inclined to take a design seriously if it shows even a little bit of respect for its source material. A lot of you are probably still in high school, so you might not yet have a field in which you're an expert, but one day you will. Imagine you're a professional baker watching a show where someone makes croissants, but the steps are completely wrong. It's a careless imitation of something you've poured your life and soul into. That feels insulting. You probably wouldn't mind some simplifications, but you would still want some basic attention paid to the thing that you love. Now that I think of it, this is exactly why Hazbin's designs get me so riled up. It's not just a style thing, my expertise feels like it's being disrespected. That's what pushed me to write over 18,000 words about a show that came out over a year ago. Oh my god. Maybe I'm the unhinged fan. Damn. Anyway, most of the time these things aren't that deep. But that's not an excuse to get lazy and skip the research. I'd even argue that part of the joy of character design is getting to learn about things you otherwise might never have explored. I mean, I now know more about monocles than most people, and that's because of my research for this video. And remember, research does not have to be interpreted literally or overtly displayed. It can be simplified, exaggerated, remixed, or even removed from a design, as long as it feels fitting.
My redesigns for Alastor were all over the map. Frankly, I had a really hard time designing him, and this is for a few reasons. Primarily, I had a bunch of smaller ideas for him, but I just didn't know how to combine them into a set of cohesive concepts. Secondly, Alastor is the fan favorite of the show. People love the way he looks. They take everything to do with him personally, so how was I supposed to contest that? Well, at first I was trying to make sure that as many people as possible would like what I did with him, but I realized that, no matter what I do, people will be disappointed. So instead of focusing on everyone liking him, I wanted to focus on what I think makes sense, but also presenting a wide variety of directions his design could go. Let's start with the deer direction. This set of designs here is probably closest to what his official design is, but is more deer-like. I gave him deer legs, hooves, and I improved the size of his antlers. Now, the antlers, if you look closely, are hand-shaped, and this is on purpose. I think this would look super creepy when they expand in his full demon form. I also changed up the hair to be finger waves. It looks much neater than his existing design, but I also kept the ears. I think the ears are kind of cute, but I don't think that they take away from his serious nature. His costume is the jazz suit that I mentioned earlier. It is not too crazy different from his official design. It still has that narrow waist, but it is a shorter coat, and the trousers do not flare out.
As for color scheme, I had a fun time playing around. I started with this sepia version, which is similar to what I did in my redesigns, and also I tried to add a lime green accent in the eyes. This is because this is the color of his demon powers, and I feel like it makes sense to have some hint of his power in his design at all times, so something subtle like the eyes makes sense to me. I also included it in his staff. Oh, speaking of the staff, this is a design based off of real 1920s, 1930s microphones. This design is with this on the air sign on top, and this is a little complex. I don't think it's necessary. The text could be removed in most scenes, but perhaps when the staff is in use and up close, that's when the on the air sign switches on. This color scheme is interesting to me. So, one of my favorite things he does in the show is when he turns into a shadow and melts away, and I wanted to see what that would look like if it was a more permanent fixture of his design, and that's why I gave him this. Imagine that he is almost translucent looking up against a background. He is dark and kind of blends in with everything, but his giant green eyes and yellow smile pierce through everything. Think of it like the Cheshire Cat. He kind of like reveals as much of himself as he wants to. These two versions I'm not such a big fan of. They're a little boring to me, and I don't think they say all too much about him. This one reminds me of the Joker, in all honesty, but I do like the gold hooves on this option. Again, I don't think this suits Alastor, but it was fun to try anyway. And finally, we have this color scheme, which you probably see is familiar. This is Alastor's official color scheme, and I wanted to put it onto my design to see how much of an issue the colors of Alastor itself are an issue versus his overall design. And yeah, I think that his color scheme is a massive contributing factor to why I dislike his official design so much. There's this additional deer-like design. I think it's a little too busy in the face though, even though I got rid of the antlers, but I do like the hair and I do like the suit. This suit is another version of a jazz suit. This set of designs is my attempt at making a character heard and not seen. Now, you cannot make a character design invisible, or I suppose you can, but that doesn't really work for what I'm doing here, but I did want to make him enigmatic, and that is why I removed all the detail in his face except for the eyes and the smile. This option here, I maintained a deer-like quality. I gave him antlers, I gave him deer ears, but it feels a little unserious and cutesy. I don't really know how I feel about this one, but this option here is really spooky to me. I really wanted the fedora hat to kind of act as a break-off point for where the eyes are, so that he's always in this kind of squinty, knowing, wry face, smile situation, whatever. Now this option makes him look like he has a pinhead, but imagine this version being really tall, really broad shoulders, so his head is actually a normal size, he's just gigantic. You can probably see that these are not jazz suits. These are a totally different silhouette, and that is of American suits in the late 1920s. This was very popular for especially well-to-do men, and they had a much more relaxed fit. Smooth, round shoulders, nothing with shoulder padding, relaxed torso, there wasn't any waist cinching, and wide leg trousers. Wide leg, not flared like in his official design, so they go straight down instead. I think this looks great. I think that this really feels of the era. However, the pinstripes I gave him kind of make him feel like a mobster, which is something that Angel Dust should have, not him, so I don't know. As for color scheme, I tried the sepia thing again here, and then with these two, I was trying to figure out where I wanted to incorporate green to symbolize his demon powers. I think that this green suit is unfortunately a little too greed, envy direction, reminds me a little bit of Mammon from Hell of a Boss, but this grey version I think feels nice and cool and contrasts against the red, but there is still green in the eyes, so I think I prefer this one. Finally, we have the radio head options. Now, later in the video I expressed my distaste for object heads, and that still rings true, but I wanted to try options that felt like a nice pairing against Vox, the TV head. This massive shouldered guy is the more simple option, I suppose, and this is a little beefier looking. I think he looks like some big name head honcho businessman, which maybe doesn't fully align with the Alastor that is in this show, but I'm not so sure. We don't know him very well yet, so I'm really working with scraps, honestly. But anyway, I imagine that his face wouldn't move too much. This is a radio webbing that is now translated to being 3 eyes and a mouth. So rather than moving a bunch, I would want to see this like being backlit and flickering every time he speaks. I think that would be cool, and I think it would suit his voice. I gave him a mismatchy suit set because this was pretty common in the summertime. I think that this also feels a little lighter, but it's still green for the whole demon power thing. This option, as much as I enjoy it, I think is possibly too complex to animate, but this is what I had in mind. So, the radio, as you can see, is not actually physically part of his body. It is a separate entity that is being held in place by branches that are twisting and warping out of his body, holding it together, and also being turned into antlers. I think this looks super unusual and kind of sparks questions for me, like, is this guy even real? Is he like a puppet? What is he? And I think these are the kinds of questions that we are already asking in the show. Now, once again, his mouth would not move, his eyes would not move so much either, but I gave him pupils this time, and I feel like he could still be pretty expressive. I also gave him a pencil mustache. Not necessary, but I wanted to try it out. And I also gave him leaves. I feel like the leaves are doing a bit too much, but I wanted to try something that mirrors the radio that we see in the show proper that is sitting on a bed of leaves. As for his clothing, once again, we are doing the whole green thing, but it is much more calm. I think it's pretty unassuming, but he still has big broad shoulders. He has a brightly colored waistcoat. I think that this version feels like a mixture of very ordinary on the bottom and very odd up top, and I feel like this makes sense for a character like Alastor. So that's all my Alastor redesigns. I really don't know how to feel about them. I don't dislike them, that's for sure, but I don't have a favorite. I don't know which direction I'd want to go in. I want to know what you guys think. Do you have a favorite? Is there something you really like or dislike? Let's dissect this in the comments.
And we have another newcomer, Husk. I didn't redesign Husk in my original video, so this will be a fresh take. Back in the pilot, he was one of my least favorite designs, overcomplicated and disjointed. The biggest offender? Those playing card symbols on his wings. Oh, imagine animating that frame by frame. Utter pain. But more than just complexity, it's a classic case of show, don't tell. If you want us to know Husk's a gambler, show him gambling. Don't slap symbols on him like a sticker pack. Not much changed between the pilot and his official version, but thankfully, those card symbols are gone. I'm sure the animators celebrated that one. That said, I still think Husk's design is way too busy. Now, quick pause. If you're watching this expecting me to dive into drama surrounding VivziePop, I'm going to have to disappoint you. I'm not here to melt my brain with Twitter nonsense I don't care about, and I don't give a rabbit's fart about stuff outside of the series proper. Okay, except for this one thing. There's this spreadsheet out there, which I'll link below, where animation workers anonymously rate studios they've worked for. It covers things like pay, workload, treatment of employees, and general vibe. A lot of indie studios are listed, but one that comes up a lot, and not in a great way, is Spindlehorse Toons. Now, I know Hazbin Hotel is animated by Princess Bento in Australia, but Hell of a Boss, as far as I know, is still handled by Spindlehorse. And unfortunately, the reviews paint a pretty rough picture. High turnover, low pay, and brutal output demands. To be fair, none of the submissions are verifiable. These are anonymous after all. Maybe Spindlehorse folks just come across the form more often. Still, based on LA whisperings and off-record conversations I've had, this doesn't feel like a total fluke. It seems like a studio that hasn't nailed a healthy work-life balance. I want to be clear, I don't expect indie studios to be perfect. Operating a studio is hard, but I do expect them to listen and evolve, especially when this kind of feedback comes up again and again.
One concern that stood out to me, because it comes up several times, is this idea that even freelancers are expected to be mega fans. Like, if you're working on Helluva Boss, you're supposed to be as obsessed with the Helluverse as any fan. That doesn't just blur professional boundaries, it risks creating a pipeline where passionate but inexperienced fans get exploited, or where people who have to fake enthusiasm just to get hired. And when you mix that with intense, highly detailed, hand-drawn work, it's a recipe for burnout. Which brings me to Husk. To someone outside the industry, it might seem like a stretch to connect a character's wing decor to all this, but to working animators, this is where the stress begins. Those wing dots. There's at least, I think, 10 on each wing. If he's animated on 2s, for a 1-minute scene, that's 30 frames. Multiply 10 dots on 2 wings by 30 drawings, and that's 600 dots. For just one character for 1 minute, and that's not even factoring the tail patterns, ear hearts, glove motifs, etc., the rest of the design. Multiply that across a 22-minute episode with multiple characters like that, and you're looking at, frankly, an absurd amount of extra labor for a detail that is ultimately benign. Now, I'm not saying we should avoid complex designs just because they're hard. Some things are worth the effort. But when jobs are scarce, pay is low, and AI looms overhead, we need to ask, is this detail helping the story, or is it just exhausting the artists? And for the record, this isn't even a targeted criticism of Helluva Boss or Hazbin anymore, it's general advice to anyone making an animated short or series. Economize when you can. Animation is all about picking your battles. What can you simplify? Where can you go all out? What's sustainable for your budget, your team, and your sanity? Okay, tangent over, but I hope that helps explain why I'm so anti-wing dot and why these excessive design choices, while seemingly small, can ripple out into huge production consequences. Okay, aside from the wing dots, let's break down what else clutters Husk's design. A red, white, and black striped tail fan with a grey base. It was even a mouthful just describing it. Then there's massive eyebrows with 2 stripes and a dot each. An inner ear red tip and a tiny heart detail. Why? Fingerless gloves, yet again, with gold hearts, which makes no sense for a bartender, I'll get onto that in a second. And a top hat, suspenders, and a bow tie on top of everything else. Any one of these details would have been fine. Altogether though, visually exhausting. At this point, Husk looks like a Mary Sue O.C. Outside of the excessive details, here are my other complaints. Somehow, Husk is yet another wearer of fingerless gloves. Why is another character wearing fingerless gloves, especially him? What self-respecting 60 to 70-year-old bartender from the 1970s would be wearing these? They weren't trendy then, they weren't even practical. Gloves make no sense for a guy constantly washing glasses and cleaning spills. It's like wearing wet socks. It feels like another early 2010s aesthetic leftover, a Vivziism more than a character choice. And of course, we have yet another bow tie victim. Sure, bartenders sometimes wear bow ties, but in the Hazbin universe, they feel almost mandatory. I'd argue Husk wouldn't choose one himself. They itch, they're snug, and Husk doesn't strike me as someone who prioritizes presentation. This feels like aesthetic bloat, not a practical decision. Why is he so long and slinky? As per the Vivzy Pop trope, Husk is tall and extremely slim. I do appreciate his hunched back, though. Bad posture actually suits his character, and I wish more of the cast embraced that kind of specificity. Anyway, like I mentioned earlier, if you want to show Husk as a longtime alcoholic, give him a damn beer belly and a big ruddy nose. I know that's not exactly sexy, but it's sincere and far more unique than the same old skinny mini silhouette. Okay, but seriously, have you ever gone to a pub in the UK and seen a 60-year-old bloke whose face is a beaming, brilliant tomato, whose sunken eyes are full of decades of lager and watching his favourite football team fail again, whose absolute honker of a nose has its own gravitational field? Now that's interesting character design. The faces and bodies of those men tell a story. They're captivating, specific, and instantly recognizable. British retiree hooligans obviously aren't the only types of drunk gambling addicts, though. But alcohol does tend to cause a specific set of visual changes that apply to heavy drinkers across the board. Redness or flushing, especially around the nose and cheeks thanks to broken capillaries. Puffiness or bloating in the face. Sunken eyes with dark circles from poor sleep and dehydration. Yellowing of the eyes and skin from liver damage. A swollen abdomen from liver cirrhosis. Weight gain because alcohol is calorie dense. Or weight loss from malnutrition. I completely get that Husk could fall into the malnourished alcoholic camp. But for the sake of variety, I think pushing into chubby territory could be way more fun. Either way, that swollen, liver-diseased belly can exist across both builds, and that's really what I'd focus on most in a redesign. Of course, you could handwave all this away with, he's a demon, hell doesn't follow human biology. But why? Why ignore such a distinct, grounded, and visually rich set of characteristics that could make Husk more expressive, unique, and therefore memorable? Less is more. Husk is a prime example of details doing little to sell a character. Not much is needed to give an audience a sense of who a character is, especially once they're animated and talking. Including a few well-placed clues mixed in with some unique and memorable features can create a really appealing and intriguing design that communicates far beyond what a detail smorgasbord ever would. Selective detail will almost always say more. It takes us back to the idea of contrast. When everything is visually screaming for attention, nothing actually gets through and my eyes will simply glaze over. A lot of rookie designers fall into this trap, overcompensating with accessories, texture, patterns, gradients, thinking it'll make the character more interesting or cool, as if the more ideas the better. But more often than not, it makes them harder to read, harder to draw, and harder to remember. Audiences aren't pausing every frame to admire your 7 layers of ruffles, they're trying to emotionally connect with what's happening. Of course, this doesn't apply the same way for illustration. When you have the luxury of everything being in one image for however long the viewer chooses to view it, giving your audience a detail feast can be fun. But remember, we're talking animation here. The best designs usually have 1 or maybe 2 visual ideas they're built around. Maybe it's a shape language, maybe it's a motif, maybe it's an expressive posture or unique proportion. Everything else should support that core, not fight it. I think of Kingpin from Spider-Verse. He is so simple, yet phenomenally effective. Speaking of Spider-Verse, to some degree that's actually a more is more franchise, but that has its place. CG animation often has the luxury of more detail-rich design, but the motifs and focal points are always really honed in anyway. Like Pav, this Spider-Man has a lot going on, but the focus is clearly his eyes, and all the details are very specifically about Indian culture. They follow one motif. This is not detail for detail's sake, it is an essence of incredibly ornate source material. So ultimately, it's still a simplification in that sense. And just to be clear, less is more does not mean lazy or boring. It means intentional. It means asking, what does this design need to communicate, and what can I remove without losing that message? The result is often something way more powerful and way more flexible. At the end of the day, restraint is a skill. A character design with fewer, smarter choices will almost always outlast a cluttered one that tries to do everything at once. In the case of Hazbin designs, there is an overabundance of the same few motifs: X's, hearts, stripes, dots. And unfortunately, because they are so repetitive, they end up losing meaning. It's just busyness on a design that doesn't actually say anything about that design specifically. If anything, it kind of becomes environmental storytelling, but it's not telling a story, it's just saying, hey, I like hearts, let me put it on everything. And I feel like that's a missed opportunity. Now it's Husk's turn for my redesign treatment. So, I haven't redesigned him before, and I enjoyed this new character to explore. But yeah, he is very different than his official design, and I think that might scare some of you off, but please hear me out. I have a lot of thoughts on what I've done here. Husk is the epitome of a has-been. He is a 60 to 70-year-old guy who is totally washed up, is an alcoholic with a big old beer belly in my head, and he is deep in his gambling addiction. He is miserable more than half the time, and so I really wanted to show that visually. And so I did this in several elements, including scruffing up his fur. His fur is droopy, his posture is awful. I played around with his posture. Some of it has his belly sticking out, some of it has his shoulders hunched over, but either way, he looks like he's having a rough time. And I think that this helps lean into his character, but it also just makes him feel a little more unique up against everybody else in the cast. Costume-wise, I kept him relatively similar. I think that for a bartender of the 1970s, it makes sense for him to have a waist jacket or suspenders or a tuxedo type thing. I gave him a tie in one option. I kept his top hat in a few designs. You know, one of the things I did with him is I really played around with his costume, but ultimately it all still has the same formal feel. With his top hat, I do want to point out one thing. I think this is a little too complex for animation, but I tried it anyway, and that is this one. He has poker chips as the band around the hat, and I personally really like that. I think it's a subtle nod to his gambling addiction, because look, let's talk about this real quick. His card suites on his wings from his pilot design, in theory, are kind of cool, but as I said, it's very show don't tell, and it is far too complicated to animate. But I still think there is room to very subtly incorporate the themes of gambling and a deck of cards in his design. And so that was my primary motivation here, actually. If you look at the faces, they all have a different symbol on them. We have a diamond, we have a club, we have a spade, we have a heart. And that was the motif that I kept throughout each of those designs. So you can see in this diamond one, I added some diamonds in this one's wings. For the spade, I put it on his tail. I personally am more of a fan of intentional design choices that are subtle, but you know, they can still lean into something that should be primarily shown. I think that this is a balance between show and tell. As for his colors, yeah, I got rid of the red, and instead I brought in this bottle green. And there's a reason why. Not only is it the green of alcohol bottles, but it is also the green of gambling tables. You know, classically, if you think of a casino environment, it's very much black, white, red, gold, and green. And so this green not only stands out from everybody else in the backgrounds, but it also feels thematic to him. I paired this with primarily black and grey for his actual body, and I did this because I think that I would like to keep him relatively uniform in colour. If we start adding too many values, too many different colours, then he gets really lost against that complex background that we're used to in Hazbin. There's a few slightly more varied colour options here that I think are fine, but look, let me be so honest, color is not my thing. It is one of my biggest weaknesses, and I had the worst time trying to figure out his color options. Like, none of this felt right, and so if you want to have a go of redesigning these in your own color scheme, please go for it. I'll include like the gray versions here, and you can trace over them, screenshot them, do whatever you want. I really think that these designs have potential, but I feel like my coloration of them is not doing them justice. Overall, as you can see, I did simplify him down pretty massively. I got rid of a lot of the designed stuff on his tail and on his wings, but hopefully you'll agree with me that this still feels like a Vivzy Pop design. It still feels in-world, and it is just a little more animation friendly. Let me know which one your favorite is. Our last character today is Sir Pentious. And I'm sorry to say, but his design is yet another flop in my opinion. It feels thoughtless, overcomplicated, and uninspired. I'm not going to review his pilot design since it's nearly identical to the official one, so let's just jump straight into what we ended up with. A Victorian villain that doesn't look Victorian. Or does he? Once again, I'm here to grumble about era-inappropriate costume design. Sir Pentious supposedly died in 1888 in England, which puts him smack dab in the late Victorian period, and wait a second. This can't be. Well, that's actually the same era everyone else in this show seems to be cosplaying. Oh, even a broken clock is right twice a day. Sorry, that sounded so mean. I really popped off there. Whatever. Anyway, in all seriousness, Pentious is surprisingly close to what I'd consider era appropriate. Here's what I think Viv got right. His clothing is mostly black or dark toned. This fits nicely with the post-1861 fashion trend after Queen Victoria lost her husband and went into mourning. Pinstripes were definitely a thing back then, though Pentious's stripes are sparse and uneven in the official version, so I don't even know if I can call them pinstripes anymore. Either way, they're the right idea. Thankfully, top hats were in. Pentious gets a solid pass on that front. Bow ties? Also era appropriate. Of all the characters, Pentious is the one I'd most expect to wear one. Victorian menswear was more reserved than women's fashion, so neckwear like bow ties, ascots, or four-in-hand ties were often where guys injected a little bit of flair. And here's what didn't work for me. The lapel shape feels too modern. Victorian men usually wore long, sleek shawl collars, sometimes in satin or velvet, which would honestly be more fitting and more fun for Pentious. There's no visible shirt collar in his design, which feels like a huge missed opportunity. This was the era for collars. Men often bought multiple detachable collars, and they were tall, slim, and really enforced that long, lanky silhouette that seems to be Viv's go-to. Banker collars, wingtips, fold-downs, so many great options, all ignored. The gloves. We're dealing with another fingerless glove victim. While Victorian men absolutely wore gloves all the time, seriously, there were gloves for every occasion, I couldn't find a single historical instance of fingerless gloves for men, only women. Sure, you could hand wave it as Pentious stealing a pair of ladies' gloves, but that feels like a stretch with no payoff. While a standard jacket is fine, so this isn't even really a complaint, I'd love to see a cape or capelet on him. Those were very popular at the time and kind of remind me of Sherlock Holmes. I think it would lean perfectly into his mustache-twirling stock villain vibe. And then my non-costume related thoughts. Why eyes? I have to be honest, the eye motif is just not working for me. The scattered red eyes on his head, hat, and tail feel random and disconnected. And look, I love a good eye motif. It shows up in my own work constantly, but here it feels hollow. There's no clear symbolism or thematic reasoning. Eyes in character design can be powerful. They've represented protection, surveillance, luck, omniscience, even divinity. They appear in religious texts, folklore, ancient art, but this just feels like someone thought eyes look cool, I don't know, and ran with it. Snake eyes in particular can represent bad luck, hidden danger, which could fit, but again, it's so diluted by all the other clashing elements that it doesn't land. Frankly, repeated eyes are one of those classic amateur design shortcuts, a way to signal creepiness without earning it. Also, sorry, but the ones on his tail look more like angry zits or octopus suckers. I literally didn't realize they were supposed to be eyes until I checked the wiki. They just look like blobs on a smooth surface, like raindrops on glass. Generic snake, boo! Snakes are so cool and varied. There are thousands of species with gorgeous patterns and distinctive shapes. So why did we end up with this bland, stripy nothing snake? Pentious supposedly lived and died in London, so it would be fun to reference a native British snake, because yes, we have those, for his design. I'll go into my picks when we get into my redesign, but this just feels like another missed opportunity. His proportions are uncomfortable. Most snakes have a fairly consistent body width up until the head and tail, unless they've eaten recently or are pregnant. So what's with Pentious's weird snatched waist? It makes his tail look swollen and disproportionate, or like it belongs to a totally different reptile. It even gives off that slightly disturbing vibe of someone wearing a suit that's too tight, or a wedding ring they haven't taken off in decades. It's not adding to the design, it's just making me squirm. One more round of detail overload. Once again, we're drowning in visual noise. Sir Pentious has so much going on that it's hard to tell what I'm even looking at. To his credit, the yellow in his design does help him stand out a little more from the rest of the cast, but still not from the backgrounds. That weird eye-hair situation thing is doing so much, but saying so little. Another case of detail for detail's sake, rather than anything rooted in character or narrative. And just the clutter of his hat, too. There's the, I think it has an eye, a mouth, and there's the goggles. There's just so much. Anyway, the final topic in today's video is grouping. Grouping is a key principle that I actually discussed in my second Hazbin video, but I want to reframe it here with some new context. In short, Hazbin Hotel is, accidentally, a masterclass in camouflage, because its character designs follow the same visual tricks that wild animals like tigers, deer fawns, and zebras use to blend into their environments. In the book, The Telltale Brain, Neuroscience and Art, seasoned neuroscientist V.S. Ramachandran proposes the 9 laws of aesthetics, a series of principles explaining why we find certain visuals appealing. I highly recommend artists check it out, especially if you're curious about the science behind what we do. One of those laws is grouping, which refers to our brain's ability to process chaotic sensory input and organize it into single, identifiable units. It's a crucial part of how we make sense of complex visuals and is part of our evolution to keep us safe from things like lions hiding in the grass. Take this example. Can you see the dog? Your brain probably had a little click moment when the mess of splotches resolved into a single image. That's grouping at work. Our brains rely on specific types of visual data to do this, including proximity, so things that are close together are seen as a group, continuity, we follow continuous lines or contours even when broken, and similarity, when elements look alike in shape, color, texture, size, whatever, we interpret them as part of the same thing. Artists can harness this knowledge to create a strong visual hierarchy, making characters pop even in a complex setting. Unfortunately, Hazbin often does the opposite. Let's look at my character Nico. Here's him in his original design, and here he is with a leopard print coat. Both stand out pretty well on a plain background. Arguably the leopard version is even flashier. But drop him into a detailed environment and suddenly, it's harder to read. His limbs feel detached from his torso and the leopard print becomes more of a mess than a statement. This works the same way that animal camouflage does. A bold pattern like stripes or spots can actually break up a silhouette, making it hard to detect against an equally busy background. Our brains struggle to identify the contours and consistent shapes, so the figure disappears. That's why a tiger can sneak through the jungle despite being so flashy. Now, camouflage isn't always bad. You can use it intentionally to your advantage. I've got characters in my own world who are practically invisible until they blink. Grouping just reminds us that if you want something to stand out, you need to guide the viewer's eye, not overwhelm it.
It's Sir Pentious' turn for his redesign. I've never redesigned Pentious before, so this is a whole new adventure for me, and I honestly had a really good time. As you can see, I stuck with his original color palette because I think of all the main cast, he has the most successful one. The yellow and black really stands out against not only the other characters, but also the red backgrounds of hell. The main thing I did change was his body pattern and his body shape. His body shape with that pinched waist was really not giving snake, so I adjusted it to have a more consistent thickness throughout aside from the tail. I think this still feels like Sir Pentious, but is a lot more snake-like now. As for his pattern, I wanted to base it off of an adder. Adders are a native British snake because yes, we have those. It is our only venomous snake, and it has a diamond/zigzag pattern on its back typically. I think it's a little complex looking and would be kind of a nightmare to animate, so I would want to figure this out a little more, but in concept, I'm pretty happy with it. In this version, I added some color blocking so that the flow of his body is a little more distinct, and this just provides some more visual clarity. I would want to incorporate this into the other options too.
His hat is possibly one of my more controversial changes that I did. So, as you can see, in these two designs, I got rid of the goggles. I think there was just far too much going on up there, and it was complex and unnecessary. I get what the goggles are for, but he could just put them on any other time. I know his hat is sentient, that's why I focused on this, and I don't really know its function yet, but it is there. It is probably there for a reason, so I kept it. But in this version, I moved things around. I got rid of the hat and mouth, and instead moved the eye to be the two eyes inside his goggles. So now it's like a compromise, it's kind of the best of both worlds. I also made sure that the eyes were a different color than Pentious' actual eyes, so that they feel a little different, they are distinct from each other, but when they're actually emoting and moving around, they still feel uniform. As for his costume, I changed it up a little bit, just to make it a little more era appropriate. I lengthened the jacket, I lengthened and narrowed and rounded the lapels, I kept the bow tie, one with a rounded version, one with a more pointy, kind of fishy almost looking version, and then for this design I gave him a cape, or a capelet technically, because I think this is very classic Victorian villain feeling. He has gloves in all of these options, most of them are light coloured so they stand out against the background, and he also has a waistcoat in all of these, because waistcoats were very, very common back then. In fact, they were considered like an expectation of sorts. His head fan is possibly another one of my controversial changes, but hear me out. So the eye thing, I had already said, I think it's a little lackluster and purposeless. But I know that he has hypnosis powers. He sparingly uses it in season 1, so it is there for a reason. The eyes do make some degree of sense, but I wanted it to feel a little more targeted. So rather than getting rid of all of the eyes in his head fan situation, I turned the fan itself into one eye. Can you see how his head is the pupil, and then the fan is the sclera and the iris? I think that this looks really cool personally, and then here is an option of how it would look in hypnosis mode. I don't know, I like this choice, do you? I also add like eyelashes, I really wanted to lean into this being one eye. In these two versions, I extended the head fan. I don't love it, but I do want to point out that in this one specifically, the white is supposed to represent the eggs, like his egg boys, I feel like there's a very missing connection, I guess, between him and his egg creations. He doesn't need to have it in his design, obviously, but I feel like it would be a nice subtle touch to include. As you can see, I gave him a yellow suit jacket in some of these designs. I think that this looks really good, although it's not very, accurate to Victorian times, but, we are in hell, we can, of course, take creative liberties. And in this version, what do you think about the arms being all the way down there? I personally love it. I think it gives me T-Rex vibes, which is kind of a little goofy, a little unserious, and I think that matches Pentious rather well. I think that his acting would still be very effective, and I think that this just breaks away a little from the classic Vivzy silhouette. I think it still feels like a Vivzy pop design, just now it is a little more unique. So, in terms of favorites, I don't have one. I think I would rather combine elements from all three main designs into one new one, but for now, this is what I have, and I'm pretty proud of it. What do you think? The final thing I'll be doing today is a cursory review of some of the side characters in the show. I haven't had time to do redesigns for them, nor have I had time to do any in-depth research, so my thoughts are going to be much more casual and more based on general design principles and gut instinct, as opposed to anything super lore-driven or based on historical data. But anyway, Carmilla. I like Carmilla's design. I feel like she is one of the more unique designs out there, and I really appreciate the experimentation they did with her proportions. So her overall body is pretty standard, but she definitely has hips, but her hands are really interesting. I love the fact that they made her have gigantic hands that clearly are an evolution from the spindly claws she had in the pilot. Though I liked the claws in the pilot, these hands are much more animation friendly, and that is important. Unfortunately, I think the execution is a little clunky. They feel bulky and unelegant, which goes against her ballerina design. Then again, I assume that this is a juxtaposition that has been done intentionally, but something still feels missing to me. I'd have to do my own experimentation to really identify what isn't working, but in a general sense, I like what's going on there. Her hair. Love the hair. Those horn things are super cool. They feel very unique. Not sure how I feel about the ribbon X things that have been tied onto them. I feel like they look a little scrappy, but maybe it's just the way that they are drawn often at times. I would want them to be a little more particular, but otherwise, I think that they are a nice addition. I love her mask. I think it's really gorgeous and honestly makes her like so sultry feeling, and I think that that suits the character personality. Her skirt also very cool in theory, but a little messy at times, and I think it's just because she has so many other design elements going on. Her skirt is one of my favorite things, but I also think it clashes with the ballerina ribbons on her legs, and that's a shame because the ballerina thing is also a cool design choice, but out of the two, those feel kind of messy. I think a relatively easy solution here would be to change them from white to a less high contrast color and to reduce it from 4 wraparounds, so like 4 X shapes, to just 3. But again, I'd need to play around to really make that decision. I also love that she walks on point. It is a very particular choice that I haven't really seen before, and I think it is very unique, and I like that her daughters do it too. Very cool overall. I do like her character. I wish to get to know her more. Cherry Bomb, on the other hand, is a total mess for me, but it's really tricky because I see what they're going for here. They very clearly want this chaotic Aussie to be, well, chaotic. She has mismatched shoes, she has torn up clothes, she has tattoos, she's all over the place, and I think that's a totally valid aim. Let me go through one piece at a time. Her hair. I love it. I think that the weird, like, sticky outy part really works well for her, and I've seen cosplay for it, and I always enjoy the solutions people have for the cosplay for her. Her eye, I think that's great. The X, I'm not so sure how I feel about it, especially with the whole Vaggie motif thing. I'm sure that there's a way to make this more bomb-esque, because I know X's can sort of be a mark for explosion, but there might be something else in there. I don't know, but the fact that the pupil is not just a round shape is cool. Her freckles, again, a nice thing in theory. I think it's nice to represent different types of skin on a show. You know, like my character Nico, I give him zits all the time because, hey, I'm a person who has zits all the time. But yeah, the freckles are a little bit of a mess to animate all the time, I imagine, so I would want to find maybe a slightly different solution there, but again, I'm not sure what. Her tiny eyelashes on her eye, not a fan of them. I don't think they're necessary. I would scrap them. If we wanted to have that messy, kind of like slept-in makeup look, I would have made them more spidery, but then that would get in the way of her mouth, so I would just leave it entirely. The little X cross thing on her tit, I think, is unnecessary. I would find maybe like a cute strappy bralette for her to wear. That would probably be a little different. Thing is though, okay, I haven't done my research so intensely for these side characters, but I believe that Cherry Bomb died in the 80s. This outfit doesn't feel particularly 80s to me. The hair is fine, but something about this is a little more early 2000s, as is most of this show, so I would want to research costuming there a little more before I commit to any design choices. Her arm tattoos, again, cool in theory, but so much going on. I wonder if there's a way to solve this by having a tattoo arm texture that then is just overlaid on her arm all the time as like a rigged thing almost. It would probably go against a lot of the look of the show currently, but I think it could work very interestingly. Lucifer. Oh boy. Okay, Lucifer is another one of those characters that has the generic suit thing and the generic build, and he has too much going on. And once again, he's tricky because he is not from any particular era. He is meant to be like the king of hell. He kind of created the damn place. And so he is the trendsetter to some degree. But he just doesn't feel specific in any interesting way. The one thing I do like though is the puffy trouser legs. I forget what they're called. They're like lamb chop something or others maybe. And I also do like the snake and the apple in his hat. You know, the symbolism, I respect that, and I believe that the snake is alive. I just wish there was a slightly simplified way of doing things. I mean, he has the hat, he has the snake, he has the apple, he has the band around the hat, and he has a crown. that's a lot. What if we just scrapped the hat entirely, turned the snake into the crown, and then the jewels could be apples? You know, there's ways of combining details into more simplified, condensed design decisions, and I think it's always really clever and exciting to see those things being done. As for his build, aside from the skinny waist shoulder thing, I like that he is short and relatively unassuming, especially for someone who is supposed to be so powerful. I do like this subversion. I just wish that he was maybe a little more pathetic looking, you know, maybe give him a bit of a pudgy look or a slouch, something that could, you know, be hidden in his acting, but that is present enough that we can tell that he is not doing as well as we would like him to, you know? Mimsy's design is pretty okay. I like that she has a different body shape than the rest of the show. Fantastic. Her outfit is on the complex side, but it honestly never really bothered me too much. I'm not entirely sure why. Her trims, the like black and off-white parts, kind of remind me of film reel. I'm not sure if that's intentional or not, but that's interesting. Her eyelashes kind of confuse me. The fact that they are such a dark maroon that they're almost black but not quite means it's hard to even tell that they are in fact not part of the eye itself. But I don't mind it too much. I would probably just either lighten it or change something up in there. They also have those really annoying triangular notch things that Viv loves to pepper throughout her designs. They are totally fine in some places, but these teeny tiny ones here on the eye are so small and detailed compared to everything else in terms of scale on her that they feel pointless and excessive. I would just remove them. The feather thing on her hair. I don't know how I feel about these. The feathers themselves totally fine, but those blobs on them, I think they're like the eyes that Pentious has on his body. They look like red blood cells and are giving us nothing. Like, I would rather scrap them and let the feathers be because I think that's much stronger. I also do appreciate her necklace. Necklaces are a detailed affair, and I enjoy that this show manages to simplify them down by making them kind of floaty, you know, like just having floating circles. I think it works, and I like that it's on her chubby neck. It suits her. I have no issue there. I just wish it was a different color. And as for her colors, she feels a little different. She feels almost like she's from Cannibal Town with the more muted, cooler reds. But I would love to see her in a totally different color, but I'm not sure quite what. I would want to pick up more of her personality and more of her backstory to make that decision. Okay, I have to point out Missy Zilla. I think that's her name. This is one of the overlords that we very briefly encounter in one of the episodes. She is an epitome of chaos. She's very clearly a scene queen, and she is very difficult to look at. There's so much going on, and it really bugs me, but at the same time, I do respect what the aim of this is. I also respect that she is a different shape than the main cast. She is, you know, obviously much more animalistic. I would want to simplify her down in a variety of ways, but without compromising what the design is going for in, you know, being seen, which is often lots of layers, lots of neon, lots of pattern, lots of torn clothing. So I would probably be getting rid of some of the fluffier things that she has, or maybe just color blocking in such a way that it's more obvious what parts are what part of her body. But again, I'd need to explore this to really figure it out. I would maybe want to do things like make her shoes the same, make her a little more symmetrical in some places so that certain areas can be more focal point and really stand out. Like, why does she have so many little spot things around her mouth? But they're different colors, but then she also has like the hair stripes, and I know that those are a classic element of this era of hair. So, you know, there's just a lot framing her face, but it is taking away from the attention that should be on her eyes, her mouth, her expression. Like, the other one that bugs me is her chest. The top has like this chompy pattern. I'm guessing it's meant to be like a mouth with teeth, but it just looks like a weird AI generated Batman logo to me, so I would want to tweak that as well. Yeah, I wish I had more specific thoughts on her, but I just don't have the energy right now. I am recording this literally like 24 hours before I am ready to export this video, so it's been a long ride. Rosie! Okay, I actually really like the concept for the Cannibal Town residents having entirely black eyes. I think it works very well. I love her character in general. Her personality is very sweet, very charming, and her outfit, I think, feels unique and suits the world that she occupies. You know, Cannibal Town has its own aesthetic. That being said, once again, she is red. She's a different red than the other reds, but she is still red nonetheless. I think she could suit so many different colors, like a lavender, or white and gray and silver, or a cool yellow. Like, there's a lot of opportunity, but, you know, they stuck with the usual, and I guess that's because we're in the Pride Ring, therefore everything has to be red for some reason. I don't know. But in terms of detail, she has a lot going on, and I don't love it, but I also don't hate it. The choices that are made here, I think, all work nicely, but I would want to maybe simplify them down a little. For example, the neck thing she has, I have no idea what that is. I'd want that to be more particular, but it reminds me of The Exorcist. They have something very similar. Maybe something's going on there, I don't know. But I would reduce it from like 4 tiers of scalloping to 3, and I would make the scalloping a tiny bit larger. The scalloping on the rim of her hat, again, great in theory, but so teeny tiny. And also, they randomly get rid of a whole section of it just so that you can see her face better. And I'm like, okay, look, I think it's great that you're making her face more visible, but I feel like there's a different solution to that. You could either simplify the scalloping or get rid of it completely, or just move the way that the hat is. Yeah, it feels like a strange cop-out, but whatever. In terms of the things on her hat, I actually don't quite know what I'm looking at. It kind of reminds me of rotten food, and maybe that's actually the case. Yeah, it's just like vague blobs and a skull and like a snakish thing. I don't know what that is. I would probably want to make those things a tiny bit bigger. Or scrap them completely. I think that they are not needed to give off the vibe that she is already giving. I think that the gigantic feathery things, especially the one that droops down behind her back, are already doing so much legwork, and I think those are great, so I would keep that and leave it there. As for her skirt, I don't know how I feel about the stripes. It kind of brings attention down to her feet in a way that I find unnecessary. Why do we need to be looking down there? I would probably just keep it to maybe some vertical stripes that are on the bottom half, or just getting rid of the stripes entirely and just a little trim on the bottom to match the scalloping on the top. Again, I don't know. I would need to explore, but overall, her body is different. Her expression, the way she holds herself is different, and I like where her design has gone. I just wish it was a little more pushed. Next we have Valentino. I don't dislike his design. He is, of course, the King of Hearts, and I imagine that him and Angel are a pair in the way that they both possess a heart motif. I think that makes sense. They both really own that shape. I don't like that he is, you know, the classic Vivzy twiggish twink shape, but at the same time, he is so long and tall, and he has this very long pimp coat that it kind of works for him, and I wouldn't mind sticking to something similar to this. I would just maybe either want to lean into the stick nature even more, or play around with how his shoulders are, because the triangular broad shoulder thing is so overdone in her designs, especially that pointed way that the shoulder pads moving into the sleeves thing works. It gets just kind of boring to me. But I appreciate the few differences he has, such as the red teeth, the heart sunglass thingies, the black and white fluffy trim all over him. That's a classic pimp look. And that goes with the top hat too. It's not the Victorian type of top hat, it is the stereotypical pimp top hat, which also I enjoy the clever addition of the heart motif into the feathers that are on the hat. So yeah, he's a little busy. I would get rid of, for example, the little heart chain things that are on his chest, those little triangular kind of stripe things that are around his hips that a lot of the V's seem to have. And I would maybe place the hearts on his collar in a way that feels a little less random and a little less splotched on top. But overall, I think he's fine. Really, really fine. I like how he, in moments in the show, makes his moth wings present, because I believe he is also a moth, not just Vaggie. But I don't know. I also wish that he wasn't red, of course. I think that the red is fine on him, but I could see him in like a royal purple or a pink, or even like a royal blue. Anything regal looking. I think red feels a little trashy, and I don't think he wants to perceive himself as trashy despite being a pimp who runs an adult film studio. So there you go. Next we have Velvet, and so this one frustrates me, because though I appreciate that she has different outfits for each of her appearances more or less, every single outfit feels the same. It falls into all the tropes that Viv has presented a multitude of times, like stripes, dots, hearts, and generally that early 2000s, 2010s kind of fashion. And for someone who is supposed to be the trendsetter, this feels wrong. See, trendsetters typically are ahead of the game, and by the time that the rest of the public catches up with what those trends are, those people have typically moved on. So Velvet wearing the same thing that the average Joe in hell is wearing makes no sense to me. I would want her to be pursuing something innovative and totally unique, something that I have not seen anywhere else in this show. But alas, she looks fine in terms of her build, and I like that she's a little shorter. I like that she has hips. I enjoy her face, and it would be even like super cool and funny if she was wearing something super particular in one season, and then the next season suddenly all the background characters are wearing that same thing. Like, she has a fantastic role as an establisher of the zeitgeist, and yet nothing is happening with that. So my favorite of her designs is probably the one with her hair in two big buns. I really like the spiral shape that they have integrated into it. It kind of reminds me of Pepsi for some reason, but not a problem. I also do like it when her afro hair is visible. That's really nice. But in this version where she has like the hearts on her tits and the stripy look, I'm like, this has been done a million times already. Come on, girl, you got to get with the times. It's your job. But that's that. And finally, we have Vox. Now, I really dislike Vox, because once again, he is the same shape as everybody else, with his snatched waist and large triangular shoulders. He once again has a bow tie. He has Wi-Fi symbols, but two of them, and one of them is upside down, and he has like zigzaggy things that are supposed to, I suppose, represent electricity or like sound waves or something, I don't know. And it just feels like too much, yet at the same time, go girl, give us nothing. I also have a thing against object heads. It's a very amateur, classic design decision that is made by teenagers. I was one of them, so no hate towards it, like for teenagers that are not wanting to draw three-dimensional heads, so they stick with like objects instead. I respect that. We all go through that phase. But for it to end up being like in a professional setting, it feels a little lame. And though I get that he is meant to be like technology oriented, I think that there could be a different way to integrate the fact that he is like a TV guy. I can't think of anything off the top of my head, but if I was to do a follow-up video on this, I would probably redesign him. The other thing that bugs me is he's supposed to be like this man of technology and innovation, yet he has Wi-Fi symbols on his body. Like, I feel like we've moved past Wi-Fi being an idea of futurism. like a long time ago. Surely there is something else that we can use as a symbol that feels technologically advanced and not dated. Also, the fact that he has like an upside down Wi-Fi symbol feels so random to me. Yeah, I would scrap all of that. I also would scrap the antenna. Like the antenna, same deal. Like he's a flat screen TV. Flat screen TVs do not need antenna to work. What if we did something else? I like that he has a different color going on. This very bright cyan is very much Vox, and so when we see this color throughout the show, we instantly think of him, and I think that that works, but I wish that they leaned into that all the way and excluded all the red. One of my least favorite things about this design is the damn cyan eye. Like, why does he have one eye that's a different color? I think that it's so annoying and unnecessary, but whatever. In terms of body shape, I wish that he was a fat, broad-shouldered, big man. I want him to be like this lumbering, typical business guy who either is in the car salesman kind of avenue, like if you think of like Danny DeVito in Matilda, or something a little more imposing and gigantic like Kingpin from Spider-Verse. I feel like he could fit into either of those categories so well, yet instead we have this kind of curvaceous, twinkish, typical Vivsyism that has been done a million times before. Anyway, that is that. Those are my very cursory opinions on these secondary characters. I can go more in depth in the comments if people have questions, but overall I feel like they are stronger than the main cast because I think they came a little later down the line, a lot of them, but at the same time I think that they all still suffer from many of the same issues that I have presented throughout this video.
So that's all my redesigns for today. Though I ended up with plenty of versions for each character, I can't decide which one is my favorite for each. I've been flip-flopping so hard, but I still wanted to try and bring them all together, so I've decided to recreate the classic couch moment using a semi-random pick for each character. Yeah, so this lineup isn't necessarily what I think is best, but ta-da! Here it is. Personally, I think this is easier on the eyes, but it still stays relatively true to the characters and tone of the show. But hey, I'm biased, of course. There are plenty of things I would still tweak, but these are like not perfect at all, and they weren't meant to be. If this was a real job, I'd have spent way more than a few hours on each character, and I'd be working with feedback and an art director. But as a side project I made for fun and for free, I'm pretty happy with what came out. This is a study, an exploration, and I'm hoping that we've all learned something along the way. Oh, you might have noticed the background looks a little different from the original too. I've got thoughts on the backgrounds, as you know, so if you're curious about that or want to see a few more background redraws, be sure to subscribe and stay tuned. There's definitely more where that came from. Well, well, well. Would you look at that? We are approaching the end of my longest ever video, like by a mile longest. Wow. If you've made it this far, thank you. I know this wasn't a quick watch, it never was meant to be, but still, it feels crazy to be done. Then again, I'm the one who's been writing for weeks and filming deep into the night. It's like 1 a.m. right now. This was a chance for me to revisit something I started when I was 18, with a little more knowledge, a little more hindsight, and maybe just a smidge more trustworthiness. I've said a lot throughout this video, some of it critical, some of it silly, some of it probably heading straight to the Hazbin subreddit. But everything I shared is coming from a place of love for character design. I look back at that first redesign video and I don't cringe. I see a version of me who cared even if I didn't have the language to say it yet. I see the same passion in a lot of the people who disagreed with me too. Whether you were in the comments yelling about Alastor's Christmassy color scheme or passionately defending the X on Vaggie's eye, thank you for engaging. We're all just people who care way too much about little cartoon guys. And you know what? I think that's kind of beautiful. I'm not here to pretend that my takes are gospel or that VivzyPop's team should have done what I did or whatever, but I do think that there's value in asking why things look the way they do. What's the purpose? What are we saying without meaning to? And how can we as designers and storytellers be more intentional, even if we're just doodling sexy demons on a Tuesday? Hazbin Hotel is an extraordinarily imperfect show.
but it's also a fascinating one. It exists in this weird intersection of internet fandom, creator ambition, and aesthetic overload. And of course, good old-fashioned demon raunchiness. And revisiting it now, years later, has helped me reflect not only on its flaws, but on how I see design, storytelling, and even myself. So, if you've learned something, or questioned something, or even just feel like I helped provide background noise for whatever you're working on right now, then this video's done its job. I'd really love to hear your thoughts, even if they're unsavory. Feedback and engagement is important for the growth of my channel and my character. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe! Now that I've graduated college, I hope to actually start uploading again. Because I'm still likely to be super inconsistent with my upload schedule, I suggest clicking the bell so you don't miss my next post. I also have an Instagram. Follow Meppity for my art and anya.butler for my personal stuff. I mean, I haven't really posted anything in over a year to anya.butler, but I'll make my way back eventually. Why not also check out my Patreon? From just $2 a month, you get access to some behind-the-scenes content, including, but not limited to, speed paint tutorials, guides on writing cover letters, updates on the film I'm working on, my CalArts portfolio, and much more. There's even stuff for free. Making these videos is very time-consuming. This has taken over a month, and so any type of support is greatly appreciated. Thank you so much again for watching, and another huge thank you to today's sponsor, Printful. I really am a big fan, and if you want to see what I have done with Printful, this is a reminder to check out meppity.shop. There's so much stuff on there. I sell all kinds of things, but none of it is like typical YouTuber merch. I've been very particular about designing products I genuinely want to own myself and that are really cool and fun, even if you have no idea who I am. So they make great gifts, not just stuff for like Meppity fans or whatever. Every external source I've mentioned today is linked in the description. Okay, that's me done. As always, have a wonderful day, night, morning, evening, wherever you are, and I'll see you next time. Bye! Hey, what's up?
Hi, baby. I'm sorry.
By the way, all of this is being recorded right now.
Oh, Hazbin Hotel is a decent show. It's just a little bad sometimes.